So, cosmology must address the infinitesimal as well as the infinite. So let's go to the heart of the matter, because, incredibly, mass is undefined. In every textbook and encyclopedia, the amount of mass is confused with the amount of matter, perhaps because they both begin with the letter M. This means that no scientist understands E equals mc squared. This confusion allows particle physicists to talk of creation and annihilation of matter, which is impossible without understanding what matter is.
It doesn't make sense.
It's not physics. E equals mc squared is simply telling us that mass is a measure of the amount of the letter M held in matter. This means that no scientist understands E equals mc have no mass, we're told. Armed with this ignorance, the standard particle model says subatomic particles have no intrinsic mass, which is nonsense. Are they saying protons and electrons have no rest mass, no energy? It seems so. In the standard particle model, mass is provided externally by a kind of cosmic treacle of imaginary Higgs bosons. The total cost of finding something, dubbed the Higgs boson at the Large Hadron Collider, ran over $13 billion in July 2012. At a running cost of $1 billion a year, that makes it more than $17 billion wasted chasing the grin of the Cheshire Cat. The LHC operates like smashing countless jumbo jets into mountains and picking over the debris to see how they fly. But the whole is more than the sum of the bits we can see. We are not dealing with closed systems. Even worse, it's like asking one of Douglas Adams' telephone hygienists to do the investigation. The investigators are not properly trained. Energy is undefined. All you will find in textbooks are examples of different forms of energy. The Big Bang is supposed to have originated from pure energy, which is nonsense when energy only makes sense in relation to matter in motion, with respect to all other matter. But matter hasn't been defined in any physical sense involving sensible internal movement. The quantum realm is weird. It's admitted by leading physicists that no one understands quantum mechanics. It's incompatible with Einstein's postulate of no instantaneous information transfer, and it seems to involve even the experimenter's thoughts in the outcome of some experiments. Once again, any experiment is not a closed system, as physicists like to assume. That is why the quantum realm appears weird. Light and the electric force are mysteriously transferred through empty space. We have all experienced the force between two magnets. What's happening in the space between them? The pioneers of electromagnetism knew there has to be a medium to transfer the electric force. They called it the ether. The ether has to be an electrically polarizable medium that fills the universe. In that way you can daisy chain the electric force directly. It's a longitudinal force. And applying the speed of light limit to that makes no sense whatsoever, because light is a wave motion. I think I've said before, that's like the difference between pulling on a rope and feeling the tug at the other end almost instantly, and waving one end of the rope and waiting for the wave to get to the other end. Light is a slow process in the universe. So if we have this ether that fills the universe, space is full. There's no such thing as a perfect vacuum. Einstein knew that there has to be an ether, but his postulates somehow did away with it. He admitted that his theory of relativity would fail if the Earth's motion through the ether were detected. That's because his inertial frames of reference would not be equivalent. It would be like having one observer experiencing a gentle breeze from the ether wind while another might be suffering a howling gale. As it turns out, Dayton Miller repeated the Michelson-Morley ether experiments far more rigorously and at different elevations. He found an ether drift. Sadly, left hemisphere training denied and quickly forgot this fact. So let's have a look at the standard particle model. An atom, once a promise of fundamental simplicity, is really a nucleus within a hazy, probabilistic fog of electrons. The nucleus is some protons and neutrons held together by the mysterious short-range nuclear or strong force. The particles in the nucleus have a hidden, unknown number of weird, undetectable bits inside. These bits are appearing and disappearing in defiance of a principle of science that miracles are forbidden. Meanwhile, a recent report from the Large Hadron Collider suggests new findings that don't fit this model. Here's a snapshot of a proton by Professor Matthew Strassler. He writes, imagine all of the quarks, up, down and strange, that is U, D and S, anti-quarks, U, D and S with a bar on top, and gluons, a G, zipping around near the speed of light, banging into each other and appearing and disappearing. So a proton is said to be some quarks held together by some gluons, which are themselves the quantized manifestations of the strong force. There is no mention of how a force manifests as a particle. It gets much worse. A gluon is really one of several colours of gluon, but it also has the simultaneous property of anti-colour. Gluons mediate the interaction between quarks, but they also mediate the interaction between themselves and quarks. That's right, gluons are the strong force, but they also experience the strong force. Happily for the physicists, quarks are unobservable in principle because they only exist inside the nucleon. It's very convenient. This is simple. You can forget elegance. This is extreme, narrow, left hemisphere focus on a model with no basic definitions to make sense of the words being used. Andrew Pickering, the author of Constructing Quarks, who did a sociological study of particle physics, and it's an interesting book, says there's no obligation on anyone to take account of what 20th century science has to say. To listen too closely to scientists may be simply to stifle the imagination, that is the right hemisphere. Worldviews are cultural products. There is no need to be intimidated by them. We come to the electric universe model of the atom. The electrically neutral atom is made of charged particles, positive and negative, in equal numbers, together with a number of neutral particles called neutrons, stating the obvious. All subatomic particles are real, with real locations in space. It's not a probabilistic fog. There is a polarizable ether which transmits force and carries electromagnetic waves. The universe is full of an electrically neutral, perfect fluid of neutral particles which passes through atoms and celestial bodies practically as if they weren't there. Neutrinos fit this description. So, the electric universe then defines what it means by energy and mass. Energy is matter in motion relative to the matter in the rest of the universe. It used to be said in relation to the fixed stars. This is not a closed system approach. It is a unifying relational concept first articulated by Ernst Mach. So we define mass. Mass is a measure of particle distortion instead of acceleration in response to the electric forces from all other matter in the universe. It's a bit like pushing a balloon full of water. It will tend to distort rather than move. And it's the same with these orbital systems of electrons and protons and so on. Once again, this conforms with Ernst Mach's principle. Neutrons may not exist in the nucleus. If so, only two particles are necessary to build all of the elements. This idea came from Edwin Karl, who I'm pleased to say is here and will be presenting in the breakout room. And the problem for physicists is, how do you hold together all of the positive charges in the nucleus? They should repel one another very powerfully. The repulsion of those positive charged protons should prevent it from forming in the first place. However, atomic nuclei seem to require neutrons for stability. That's because when a radioactive atom nucleus decays, neutral particles are sometimes observed to leave the nucleus and exist for a few minutes before further decaying into an electron and a proton. So it was assumed such a neutral particle pre-existed in the nucleus. The what-if question wasn't asked, that maybe that wasn't so. This is an assumption which still does not explain how the positive nucleus remains cohesive. So a special short-range strong nuclear force was invented, a proliferation of forces and particles. Edwin Carl suggested a simpler solution. If the electrons remain as discrete particles in the nucleus, they will tend to arrange themselves to, on average, sit equidistant between the protons. Because the distance between the protons is greater than that between each proton and a neighbouring electron, the attractive electric force between the proton and electron, sorry if this is too fast, will be 4 times greater than the repulsive force. This simple hypothesis removes the need for an extra strong force within the nucleus. It's much simpler. And then it seems that neutrons are a short-lived, metastable resonance of a closely bound proton and electron. This is simple. The electric universe simply proposes structure within structure, a repeated pattern. To understand magnetism and gravity, we must go to the heart of matter, a similar approach to that of André-Marie Ampère, Carl Friedrich Gauss, Wilhelm Weber and Walter Ritz, who considered the behaviour of positive and negative charged particles of different mass with great success, but were ignored for political reasons. Chiefly they weren't English, I think. Here's a simple hypothesis. The electron and proton have stable, resonant orbital structures of smaller charged particles. In that case, the positron, that is the antiparticles, and antiproton are mirror particles. They're not antiparticles, they're mirrors. There is no antimatter, no creation or annihilation. But this requires that there be an ether of composite neutral particles of vanishingly small mass, the neutrinos. The neutrinos must be quite complex inside, but totally collapsed, so that they can accept energy and then become a particle and its mirror. But there's nothing, it's just assumed that when these particles seem to disappear, that they've annihilated, the matter has disappeared. That's not so. So the ether must be normal matter of vanishingly small mass composed of all the subparticles needed to split into an electron and a positron, for example, when subjected to the appropriate energy, electromagnetic energy. For stability, and this is one of the stumbling blocks, of course, for particle physicists to go this way, is that the electric force must act between the tiny particles within the atom instantly. No speed of light delay. The two stable particles, the electron and the proton, if we assume the neutron is just a metastable particle, form 254 stable nuclides plus another 85 metastable, that is radioactive nuclides, for a total of 339. So from this simple resonance systems of structure within structure, we have all of the materials we need to see, to make what we see in the world around us. When those nuclei combine with the requisite number of negative electrons to form atoms and molecules, the possibilities are boundless in the living world. What does this mean? Only a single force is necessary, the powerful, instantaneous electric force. The phenomenal strength of the naked electric force can be judged by the simple illustration in the lower left. This shows that if the charge passing through two 120-watt light bulbs in 1 second were to be transferred equally to two metal plates, the repulsive force between those plates would equal 1 million tons. So it's critical that the electric force is a balanced force, attractive or repulsive. And these two propositions are the epitome of elegant simplicity. Balance. The little diagram there on the left, extreme left at the top, shows the attraction between positive and negative and the repulsion between like particles. There are two forms of the electric force that we experience. One is the electrostatic, where you have separated charge some distance apart, and the electric dipole, where the distance between the two charges becomes so small that the field is altered and you get a different effect called the dipole field. So it just depends on the degree of separation of a positive and negative charge. It's a difference in scale. On our scale, we experience the dipole field of atomic electric fields and subatomic electric fields in the form of magnetism and gravity. They are dipole fields. So both forms of the electrostatic and the dipole field occur between atoms and is responsible for chemistry. The E-force operates between all of the particles and subparticles within each atom. In close proximity, this can result in distortion of the atoms to form electric dipoles themselves, which can result in attraction to form a molecule. Or they may enter a new resonant dance by sharing an electron, as chemistry. The dipole distorting action on electrons and protons produces dipolar magnetism. The diagram there is actually, I made a mistake, the positive and negative on left and right should be reversed. But this just shows that if you, let's try this thing here. If you have an electric field operating on a particle here, charged particle here, and accelerating it, and on the opposite side decelerating it, the result will be an elliptical orbit with the nucleus at one of the focuses. And the result of this is that you get a transverse dipole, and that transverse dipole is shown there as the magnetic force, because if you have two current-carrying wires where the electric field in the wire is causing this distortion in electrons, then the dipoles are aligned so that they tend to attract, and we know that current flowing down two wires in the same direction attract, in the opposite way they repel. Okay, so, and the other thing is that I mentioned there ultra-weak dipolar gravity. And this is the diagram of what happens to an atom in that case. The gravitational field cannot be shielded from, so the gravitational force operates on the heavy nucleus so that it falls towards one of the focuses of an ellipse. This time it's oriented radially towards the surface of the body. But the interesting thing about that is that once you've said that, this means that a body like the Earth and the Moon, which I've shown here, the negative poles on both bodies are facing outwards, which means they're repelling one another. So it means that it's long-range repulsive, short-range attractive. We on the surface of the Earth are like iron filings. We don't care which magnet we go to, just the nearest one will do. The gravitational mass of the distant galaxies had a fundamental influence over the motion of the bodies in the solar system, and this is actually shown by precession of the perihelion of the planets, which is tied to the distant stars and not to the sun or general relativity, because general relativity doesn't have a reference frame like that. Short-term changes in the Earth's magnetic field that occur over periods of just years or decades have now been shown in new research to have a very close relationship with changes in gravity. The two are very similar forces. There is no gravitational collapse in space, no black hole swallowing everything. It is the electromagnetic force alone that coalesces matter in deep space. So the assumption that gravity was the controlling force on the large scale is incorrect. There is no need for a big bang to separate everything initially. Gravity is a balanced force like magnetism and cannot form neutron stars or other fanciful supercondensed celestial objects. A planet's gravity is established at its birth by powerful electromagnetic forces. And once the body is formed and the charge on the surface is established, the gravitational field is set by both the surface charge and the initial coalescence by electromagnetic forces. So the outcome of all that is that all matter in the local universe is connected by the electric force instantly. That's Mach's principle. The origin of mass and quantum spooky connection. Because this force is instantaneous, the so-called entanglement and non-locality suddenly has a simple explanation. And energy is a measure of motion with respect to the matter in the rest of the universe. Mass is a measure of the energy stored in the orbital motion inside a particle. And simultaneity means there is a universal time and three-dimensional space. We return to the sanity and simplicity of classical physics. These matter resonances are interesting too, because having an orbital structure allows resonant instantaneous connections and complex interactions, which explains weird quantum behaviour. The important thing is that the electron and proton have an orbital charge structure like atoms, which explains their internal energy and their magnetic moment. And distortion in an electric field appears as an increase in mass rather than acceleration. Quantum tunnelling: in transistors, electrons face a barrier like the illustration in the diagram. It's like having to carry a weight over a hill. But in a weird quantum phenomenon called tunnelling, the electron passes through the barrier as if there's a tunnel. The electric universe model of the electron and proton, having an orbital structure of oppositely charged particles, allows us to see that the hill or the repulsive electrical force between similar charges can instantly disappear or become a downhill race. The reason is that the force between two similar particles can become attractive instead of repulsive if you get the particles together at just the right moment. In chemistry, this resonance is achieved by the use of a heavy metal catalyst, which has numerous internal subatomic resonances. The same catalytic process is available, in my opinion, for nuclear fusion. So-called warm fusion is possible by nuclear chemistry, catalyzing the nuclei to attract instead of repel. So catalytic chemistry is possible, in my opinion, in the photospheric plasma of all bright stars, where the nuclei are separated from the electrons and can actually come close together in the presence of the heavy elements we see in the spectrum. And you've got to ask the question then, is this the path to future power? Like the sun, but only unlike the sun that is believed by present science. In this way, all stars generate the heavy elements in their photospheres where we detect them in their spectra. Rare exploding supernovae are the most ineffectual production means imaginable, because having produced it, you then disperse it into deep space. There's also an unsuspected resonant means of connection in living systems. The morphic field of Sheldrake, the mind-body connection, consciousness, subtle energies. The electric universe model explains biological transmutations at body temperature as demonstrated by Dr. Louis Kervran. His is a clear demonstration of this simple process. Is light a wave or a particle? If so, what's waving? Einstein did away with a medium to wave. Or is light a particle, a photon? It can't be both a wave and a particle. You'll notice they've merely mouthed a term there. It's particle-like, they say. It's a meaningless use of language. If so, according to Einstein, to travel at the speed of light, it must have zero mass. But a particle of zero mass has no energy. You can't multiply zero by infinity and get a real number. And if it's got zero mass, it can't be affected by gravity, so there can be no gravitational lensing. Lensing occurs as a simple atmospheric diffraction effect in the ether. It's like an atmosphere around the body. Evidence from stars at the Galactic Centre show no gravitational lensing as expected from standard theory. Clearly, we depend on light to observe the universe, but we don't understand light. Photons don't exist. Light is a transverse electrical disturbance in the ether. And the ether must be a dielectric medium to transfer an electrical disturbance. The wave carries energy through the medium. Just catch up here. and the energy is absorbed by the first atom that is in instantaneous resonance with the sending atom. It gives the appearance that a photon has travelled between the sender and the receiver. It's appearance only. Talking about light brings us to cosmological redshift. Hubble found the fainter and smaller a galaxy appeared, the higher was its redshift. In the diagram, you can see the spectral lines of hydrogen move progressively to the red end of the spectrum as the distance is thought to increase. The redshift was simply assumed to be due to velocity away from us, by analogy with the Doppler shift of sound. Hubble's law is considered the first observational basis for the expansion of the universe. But ironically, Hubble thought it the least likely explanation. He felt it more likely indicated some new physics. So it was Hubble's professional astronomer assistant, Helton C. Arp, who later proved this to be so. If the redshift is not simply a Doppler effect, Hubble wrote, the region observed appears as a small, homogeneous, but insignificant portion of a universe extended indefinitely both in space and time. Recently and surprisingly, more distant galaxies seem to be accelerating away from us. This discovery won the Nobel Prize and gave rise to the need for huge amounts of mysterious dark energy to power the acceleration. I wrote about that discovery on October the 6th, 2011. The discovery of the acceleration of the expanding universe is an interpretation based on total ignorance of the real nature of stars and the standard candle, which was used as the measurement to determine the distance away. So it was gratifying to find support once more in a report this month titled, "Could a new type of supernova eliminate dark energy?" It has been found that the near UV light from the most distant supernovae is brighter than the closer ones. In other words, there's something going on at the atomic and subatomic level. Of course, this is unexpected and unexplained. The diagram on the left shows the difference between the Big Bang universe and the plasma universe. It's easy to see which one is simpler. Intrinsic redshift, and Dr. Helton Arp, Hubble's assistant, who was dubbed the modern Galileo, he found redshifts, quasars physically connected to and in front of, high redshift quasars rather, physically connected to and in front of low redshift active galaxies. This observation of a quasar between the galaxy NGC 7319 and the Earth is impossible if the quasar is over 90 times farther away than the galaxy. So Hubble was right. Something is wrong with physics. Arp showed the redshift happened in small jumps or quanta, which indicates a subatomic effect. But these quantum effects are supposed to only occur at the subatomic level. Here we've got it occurring on the galactic. This requires, once again, the electric force to be operating at ultra high speed, instantaneously. So quasars are born at high speed and with low redshift. This is Arp's diagram. You see the parent galaxy in the centre. Where are we? That's this one here. And the high redshift quasars, and the redshift decreases as they move away. Initially their velocity is very high, they are faint, highly redshifted, and travelling at a fair fraction of the speed of light. Over time they gain in mass. This is interesting. It means that energy is being supplied to the matter in the quasar and the mass is increasing. So that eventually they can actually become a turnaround here and become a companion galaxy. This is an example of another path that they can take where you end up with another BL-LAC object, as it's called, producing multiple galaxies here. So there is a genealogy, if you like, of galaxies. The idea that the Andromeda galaxy is going to crash into our galaxy in the future is rubbish. It's based on the idea that Andromeda's blue shift with respect to us means that it's approaching us. No, it just means that it's older than us. So the electric universe explains this. Quasars are born at high speed and with low mass. They escape the forces of the electromagnetic galactic nucleus, that's the parent galaxy, as neutrons. And because the neutrons have no charge, they can escape the intense electromagnetic forces that hold that plasmoid in the centre of the galaxy. They have enough time to get away from those powerful forces, and then they decompose into electrons and protons, which are the forerunners of hydrogen. So as the electrical energy pours into the quasar, its mass and brightness increases and it slows down to become a companion galaxy. So this was an explanation, the only explanation for Halton-Arp's observations. Quasars are not the brightest and most distant objects in the universe. They are among the youngest and closest, so the objects in the mirror really are closer than they appear. The visible universe is smaller than we have been told. So the universe, the real universe, is in balance. It is not expanding. This is important for our understanding of gravity. Gravity cannot be simply an attractive force. The universe is of unknown age and extent. The origin of the universe is unknown. There is a universal now, and space has 3 physical dimensions. This brings everything back down to, as Tom was pointing out, conditions as we experience it on Earth. Dark matter galaxies. Galaxies are treated as isolated objects in space produced somehow by attractive gravity in an expanding universe. Their rotation and structure remains a mystery. They're made of 80% invisible dark matter. Well, Tom gave a good introduction to that story about dark matter. Dark matter has been described as an invisible elephant in the room. You know it's there by the dent it makes in the floorboards. Dark matter is only inferred theoretically by using our experience of gravity on Earth and projecting it onto the rest of the universe. Once again, it's this geocentric problem. We look at the gravity on Earth and then we just extrapolate outwards, because that's all mathematicians can do. It needs an impossible gravitational black hole in the centre. Black holes exist theoretically in asymptotically flat space in an empty universe. You cannot superimpose any other matter in such a hypothetical universe. Black holes don't exist. Yet some sport long, thin, high-velocity jets over intergalactic distances. There is no satisfactory theoretical explanation for these jets. This is the standard, taking the standard approach. Electric galaxies, on the other hand, plasma cosmology shows experimentally and observationally that galaxies are governed by electromagnetic forces. Tony Peratt said that they introduced gravity into their supercomputer runs and it made no difference whatsoever. Spirals rotate as simple Faraday motors. That's why that curve is flat. It's as if you've got a plate and you're just spinning the plate. Stars are born in and trace the spiral power lines. Where there is a higher density of gas and dust, it's typical of an electrical discharge. With the density of the material becomes greater, the discharge becomes more filamentary. Stars form along those pinched current filaments. There are no black holes. It's a compact high-energy plasmoid, and this comes down to peer-reviewed plasma cosmology. Their apparent mass is due to the relationship between mass and energy. If E equals mc squared, if you've got a high concentration of energy in that tiny plasmoid, it will exhibit a considerable mass. It's certainly not a black hole. The other thing is that galaxies line up axially, showing their electrical connectedness, because they're threaded like Catherine reels on a wire. And that wire is one of these intergalactic Birkeland current filaments. So let's look at stars. We've done galaxies, let's look at stars. Arthur Eddington had the temerity to say, it should not be too difficult to understand something as simple as a star. This is typical left hemisphere. His quote is typical: isolate, simplify and ignore a global view. Because if you look at coronas, sunspots, flares, magnetic cycles, etc., his gas model doesn't predict any of them. And the alternatives are not explored. He dismisses electrical aspects in a few paragraphs. The failure of this approach is shown by continual complications with each new discovery. It's treated as an isolated, gravitating ball of gas. Conventionally, it's a body that satisfies three conditions. It's made of hydrogen plus a few impurities. Having a core of the lightest element is the most fanciful assumption. It's needed to allow the thermonuclear energy model to be viable. That also requires hypothetical extreme conditions in the core. It's only required by the thermonuclear theory and is completely untestable. It also has, that's unverifiable, and also the sequence of nuclear reactions that take place in the core cannot be verified. They're very complex and requires quantum tunneling, which I referred to earlier. And what's more, there's a more complex, different story for different stars. It's certainly not simple. It's an explosive model because one of the reactions is sensitive to the temperature to the fifth power. It also needs an unknown radiation zone to break down the X-rays from the nuclear core. There's no body known that has a radiation or the energy transferred through the body through a radiation zone, so this is hypothetical. And also, from the point of view of life on Earth and so on, it has a restrictive and variable Goldilocks zones distant from the star. It's not the best place to nurture life in the universe. Impossible stars. Formation by gravitational accretion doesn't work. It's never been explained satisfactorily. It has hydrogen, the lightest element in the core. The model doesn't predict the observed features or behaviour. It has different models for white dwarfs, neutron stars, etc. And the life story of stars is super complicated and untestable. And some stars do strange things. They switch from one place to another without going through the transition stages. Renowned scientists like Eddington, who made grave mistakes about the sun and Einstein's general relativity, he went out explicitly to prove Einstein correct, not to test his theory, continue to haunt us today. It gives the lie to the belief that science is self-correcting. It is not, given the way in which science is done today. As Eddington said, if there's no other way out, we may have to suppose that bright line spectra in the stars are produced by electric discharges. The clues were there, but what if was not followed through. Herschel reveals a ribbon of future stars. This was reported on March the 30th this year. So this is a very recent picture. Stars and planets are formed by powerful electromagnetic forces like pearls on a cosmic string. This is a quote from an earlier report. Gravity can be ignored. Plasma cosmology. There is no gravitational accretion. There's no way you can form a string like that using gravity. Gravity is a central force and the material tends to come into a centre. It doesn't form a string. But this recent report says, and this is important, stars are shot out of the filaments by a slingshot mechanism. And there's a diagram here which shows the filaments moving around like those in the plasma ball, where they snake about. The stars, having been formed in this filament, are left behind as the filament moves on, and these stars are shot out. And it's interesting because Tony Peratt described to us once the effect seen in high-energy discharge experiments as these plasmoids scattered like buckshot. Now, it's not only stars that are formed here, it's all solid bodies, including planets. And they may be captured by the stars to form the weird assortment, over 3,500 of them so far, of exoplanetary systems that have been observed. New stars also may fission to produce hot Jupiters in very close orbits and achieve electrical stability with their changing electrical environment. The movement of the filaments, as I said, is like those in a plasma ball. Heavy elements convect into a cool core. This is interesting because those blue filaments you saw before are the coldest part of the cloud, and this is where the stars are forming. The traditional view is that the stars had to form by gravitational collapse and not lose any of the heat of the collapse, otherwise they couldn't start their nuclear fires. Well, this doesn't require any of that. It was one of the surprises for theorists is that the blue filament I mentioned is the coldest part of the cloud and contains 800 times as much mass as the Sun. This is not a surprise for plasma cosmologists. So, all stars have a cool planetary core. Stars and many planets are born together along the same electrical umbilical cord. Other planets and moons are born later in electrical fissioning events and capture events. Hydrogen and helium tend to form the outermost atmosphere. This is a diagram showing the actual form of the filaments. You'll notice the pattern there. This is showing an experimental pattern of a discharge on an insulating plate. And this shows a Martian electrical scar. You can see the similarities. As the cosmic lightning bolt fades, stars and planets are captured into planetary systems. So, electric stars, they remain a gaseous electric discharge phenomena, like spherical searchlights following their birth. In fact, some of the characteristics of the photosphere is like that of a searchlight. All bright stars catalytically produce heavy elements in their photospheric plasma discharges. Red stars have gigantic anode sheaths. Sorry, I'll get the right picture there. Plasma discharges adjust to their environment by moving electrical barriers called plasma sheaths, or misleadingly magnetospheres, because they trap the magnetic fields inside. If Jupiter's plasma sheath were lit up, it would appear the size of the full moon in the sky at opposition, and its Galilean moons would be orbiting comfortably inside it. So red dwarfs are not dwarfs, and their bloated glowing anode sheaths are the cosmic wombs for life. Because inside that radiant red sphere, all satellites receive uniform heat and light over their entire surfaces. And it doesn't matter how they're moving or rotating, that will be the case. Of course, this poses a problem for the SETI project because radio waves cannot penetrate the glowing plasma sheath. So if these are the wombs of life, we don't have any way of radio communication with them. But of course, gravity can pass through. White dwarfs are not dwarfs at all, they're just stars with no bright photosphere and a faint white coronal discharge. These are some of the planetary systems that have been discovered. You can see it's quite a shambles. So as I said before, at the galactic scale, electromagnetic forces form these gigantic Birkeland currents and they dominate. At the planetary scale, inside the star's protective plasma sheath, gravity dominates. So you have to choose the region you're talking about when you're trying to apply your model to stars, galaxies and so on. In fact, inside the star's protective sheath, with gravity dominating, and it dominates because it cannot be electrically shielded, so the impact from all of the other stars in the universe is acting like a pressure in on the planets moving around the Sun. In fact, this repulsive force from the rest of the universe can reverse the Earth's motion about the Sun in 6 months. That is 6 sextillion tons by 140,000 miles an hour. So that gives you an idea of the impact. Then the thunderbolts of the gods operate to modify masses. In planetary systems, the electric force comes into play only when plasma sheaths collide, because then the electrical insulation breaks down and the electric current flows between the two bodies. Then the thunderbolts of the gods operate to modify masses and change orbits and to quickly re-establish order. This is one of the problems that Velikovsky faced. How do you explain events within the memory of mankind of chaos in the solar system, and yet it looks like clockwork today? And this is the answer. You have to apply the electric model of gravity to be able to do this. So Velikovsky was right. Electricity and magnetism are involved in the celestial mechanism. Changing the surface charge on a planet modifies the strength of the internal electric dipole, which is responsible for the planet's mass and gravity. And the changes to both bodies, which I've shown in previous YouTube talks, tends to move the two bodies apart, which is very convenient. This overcomes the objections of the Harvard book burners to Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision. However, it doesn't detract from the title to say that worlds didn't collide. It was an electrical clash of the titans. There's Velikovsky with his great book. So what we have now in science is a mythical journey. It is a rehash of a creation myth. The Earth was born and for 4.5 billion years has remained roughly where it is now. Long ago, the Earth had a few massive impacts to birth the Moon and almost wipe out life on Earth at intervals. Ironically, planetary collisions have been found essential 66 years after Velikovsky's book, Worlds in Collision, was burned. Thousands of exoplanetary systems don't fit the story. There are stars that shouldn't exist, hot Jupiters that orbit their star in hours or days, backward orbits and polar orbits. Life on Earth remains unexplained. The odds against random events producing life are practically infinite. The rest of the story is once upon a time fragmented, boring and non-predictive. We are an isolated and improbable accident. That's why we have difficulty imagining life elsewhere in the universe. Alan Alda complains, everybody is ignorant about science. Alda was 11 years as host of Scientific American Frontiers on PBS, and he helped inspire the creation of the Centre for Communicating Science at Stony Brook in 2009. Is it any wonder, when this is the face of science today? There is no real meaning or morality in modern mechanistic science to engage students or the public. Everyone thinks it is all mathematics. It saddens me to see so much talent wasted in the pursuit of myth, hunting for dark matter. Their heads have been filled with it. Our real journey. Are you looking for the nearest exoplanet? We're standing on it. Pay attention to the oldest stories of the celestial gods who created the skies and land we see today. Yoro Yoro is a research book about the Kimberley region, Aborigines in Western Australia. And some of their stories are so close to the reconstruction of the Saturnian polar configuration that it's almost scary. And these are the words from the elders, and they were very precise in their words. It says, in the beginning people saw before the Ice Age that the moon, sun and some of the stars had been on Earth. In other words, they were very close. One song told about a flood long before the last that was brought on by a star with trails. The symbols that testify to these events are still in the Kimberley. The Wandjina creator figure, which is the one you can see on the front of the book there, features are explained. All rings around the head represent clouds and lightning. The big spirit Wandjina have large eyes. This is the eye god motif that Dave Talbot has explained at length. They never have a mouth nor ears, and the line between the eyes indicates where the power flows down, and it's not a nose. And it looks like a hollow tube, which in the plasma column scenario of the Saturnian story is accurate. Walanganda, the creator Wandjina, did not create with his hands, only through his voice with power. It reminds me of "in the beginning was the Word." Andy Hall has recently explained that the overpressure from supersonic shock waves, that is from the electrical blasts that strike the surface of a body, are powerful enough to form mountains. Rock flows until the overpressure drops, whereupon it solidifies instantly, but retains an imprint of the shock wave. Those shock waves would have produced harmonics and overtones, a global sound like a symphony of giant trumpets. There's many traditions about the creation being associated with sound. This little book I bought in Central Australia on a visit to Uluru, that great red rock, which looks just like an asteroid has landed. And it also tells a story by these people in the Kimberleys, but it's illustrated by children, and it's very quaint. The story is by David Moaljale, who's the elder. It tells of two suns in the sky who lived in hollow logs, the plasma columns. There is a period of intense heat from them. Then one sun is attacked with a spear, the thunderbolt, and is bitten by a snake, Cometary Venus, who lives in the sky. The little sun gets snagged in the fork of a celestial tree, which is the Axis Mundi, the tree of life, the celestial tree. So this is an extension of the forensic technique that Velikovsky introduced. He never referred to the Australian Aborigines, but some of their memories seem to be so accurate that they are a better source than some of the more so-called advanced cultural reports. All of these story elements make sense to mytho-historians and to the leading plasma cosmologist and colleague of Hans Alfvén, Tony Peratt. Accept best evidence regardless of its fit with modern consensus science and man-made theoretical laws. It is better to adopt a forensic science approach to the evidence for past events that cannot be repeated than to rely on theoretical science, which is based on sets of beliefs and a geocentric perspective. Use that evidence to develop a more holistic science that brings our phenomenal real journey to light. To be real and useful, science must be holistic. The electric universe is a holistic science that applies seamlessly from the galactic to the earthly to the biosphere and on down to subatomic particles. Humanity's dramatic experience of the electrical nature of celestial mechanics would make an awe-inspiring and frightening IMAX movie that would make science fiction seem a pale shadow in comparison. But in my opinion, once understood, there will be no irrational urge to revisit doomsday upon each other and the Earth under the unrecognised banners of the prehistoric warring planetary gods. Planets bear the scars of their electrical birth and past encounters on their faces. Apollo astronauts commented on the fresh appearance of lunar craters. The event that caused the great gash across the face of Mars appears in stories from ancient cultures. These are just yesterday in geological time. I recommend you see episode 2, Symbols of an Alien Sky, the lightning-scarred planet Mars. We may understand our history and place in the electric universe for the first time. This is singularly important for our sense of well-being. It gives dramatic new meaning to our lives and a sense of responsibility for our jewel of a planet. Without this sense, we probably have no future on Earth. Also, in the event myth becomes science. There was a unique myth-making period, and all surviving cultures required their stories to be faithfully transmitted for millennia. Such was their importance. We look at these enigmatic rock art figures from the remote Kimberley region in Western Australia and see only their strange, haunting and artistic beauty. And it was rather ironic that just a week or so ago, and David Novak was there to see it too, I think they had the Vivid Festival in Sydney where they project images onto public buildings, and of course the Opera House is the most public building in Sydney. And this was a presentation of Wandjina figures. I mean, they are haunting, and I think they probably evoke some kind of a subconscious connection. But how much more would they mean if people really understood their origin? We need to give more credit to the indigenous people. Now, Evan Camp said one of the unique aspects of the electric universe theory is that it's good storytelling. It answers all three questions. What if? What if the sky was different in the past? What if Saturn was worshipped as the sun? What if there were electrical discharges between planets? Let's catch up here. What if there were electric discharges between planets? Today we have meteorites from Mars. What if Lichtenberg figures explain the scars on Mars and Earth? Show students pictures of cratering on different bodies and ask students to explain them from 2 points of view. The standard model needs different explanations for each. Oops, sorry. That was unexpected. The electric universe, on the other hand, has a single explanation for them all. Then there is the story of the dissidents. If only Birkeland hadn't been ignored, Hans Alfvén had been listened to, Halton Arp's research hadn't been dismissed. A Pixar rule for storytelling, number 16, what are the stakes? Give us reasons to support the character. What happens if they don't succeed? Stack the odds against them. What of the future if this goes on? We continue wasting money and careers looking for things that don't exist. We cripple students by not training them to think. We may have no future on this planet. As Evan Camp says, the power of eliciting engagement is to get people to come to their own conclusions. Thinking is going to be the future of education. So, our electric universe future. Mahatma Gandhi said, there is a force in the universe which, if we permit it, will flow through us and produce miraculous results. The electric universe is an inspiring story that motivates students both conceptually and artistically, and that is what's needed for left and right brain hemisphere development. Education, classical science and the arts, left and right hemispheres. Let's just catch up here. Many principles of the electric universe were foreseen by scholars in the past, Newton, Faraday, etc. A release from existential fear, Velikovsky's The Bonds of the Past, a documentary. There is a collective inability to face the truth that prehistoric mankind faced doomsday. For millennia, science has preached stability and order, but as amnesiacs we have a compulsion to instinctively repeat the catastrophes of the past, destroying each other and the earth from the sky with apocalyptic weapons, like the planetary gods of old. This was one of Velikovsky's greatest fears. But we have, on the other hand, the possibility of an unparalleled renaissance with the electric universe, bringing everything together seamlessly. Understanding ourselves and our past can heal the wounds and provide a more universal sense of connection and purpose. Understand the electric force of nature. Power like the sun and gravity. Quantum interactions. All three rely on understanding matter interactions via the instantaneous electric force. Understanding living organisms, the mind-body connection and beyond. Also, understanding the dangers of genetically modified organisms and manufactured food. There is no thought given to the effects, the unintended consequences of fiddling with these things when our basic knowledge is so lacking. And the idea in an electric universe is to live in tune with the Earth and each other. Resonant connection. On the most general level, the electric universe is a new paradigm of universal resonant connection. The arbitrary inertial frames of reference of physics are not equivalent when everything is connected in real time. How and where you are makes a difference to your energy state. For example, the GPS system is supposed to prove relativity theory. It doesn't. The atoms in orbiting clocks have a different energy from identical clocks on Earth, so engineers simply count a different number of ticks to compensate. Time is universal, unchanging and unchangeable. Clocks are not. Think of the relationships between all things connected by the universal electric force, and consider that the electric force must act instantly, otherwise no information transfer is possible between resonant tuned systems. Spacecraft using slow speed of light transmissions require constant retuning of receivers on Earth to compensate for their motion. Obviously, living systems could not function if moving parts of the body lost contact with the brain. Acknowledging this simple fact will explain quantum weirdness and open up science, particularly biology, to amazing possibilities that are presently forbidden. And understanding gravity and magnetism as balancing electric forces will change forever our view of the heavens and the Earth under our feet. As the morphic resonance experiments of the biologist Rupert Sheldrake have shown, the things that are learnt by one organism are immediately available to others like them. Anywhere on Earth, the universe learns. Resonance between molecular tuning forks allows instant information transfer, the mind-body connection, and beyond. Life is structured water. This was said to me by Gerald Pollack. The experiments, or his experiments, show the structure of electrically polarized water molecules gives rise to water's amazing properties. It allows information to be stored and transferred within a living cell, the memory mechanism of homeopathy. It suggests that the electrically polarizable ether particles may also participate in information storage as well as transmission. The electric universe resonant electrical model of matter and the all-pervasive neutrino ether suggests that resonance and structure within structure can store unlimited information and transfer it instantly. There is more to life than meets the eye. We have always known that instinctively. The electric universe suggests that the information needed for life, forget the gene, that's just the factory floor, is universal, so life can take hold wherever conditions arise that allow it. We see evidence for that in the great changes immediately following catastrophic mass extinctions on Earth. We see it in organisms living in anoxic conditions over volcanic vents on the ocean floor and at great depths in rocks. Just as gravity cannot be shielded, since all matter participates in force transfer, so it is with this universal information bank. There are no islands in space. We are earthlings in the complete resonant connection sense, in a meaningful electrical universe. The fact that we exist suggests a purposeful universe. Our lives have purpose. We don't manifest as a blank slate. So children should be observed and supported in their individual passions, not suppressed and moulded to our desires for them. We are born with a purpose, but many need help to discover that purpose. In answering the question, why are we so unhappy, Ian McGilchrist says, true happiness is based on connections with others and a sense of purpose beyond the immediate. True happiness is one aim of this conference. The new panorama of an amazing shared history and kinship must change the world. In the search for meaning, the electric universe paradigm can, as Ian McGilchrist says, change the world. Elegance, harmony and simplicity of concepts are the electric universe guiding principles. Thank you.
Profound, powerful, provocative, prolific. It's all the P words. Wal Thornhill. When I first discovered him, I think I did a search on electricity in space, and the first one I came across was understanding gravity in the 21st century. And from that point on, I was hooked. You will be sorely missed, that is for sure. And then we'll get right back to it. Okay, we got a good crowd tonight. Very nice to see. Buried Axe Blade, Shockwave, hello brother. And Valerie is here, hello Valerie. Dinano Hardcore, welcome.
Dinano no Hardcore.
And let's see, Janice, oh alright, good to see you Janice. How are you, honey? Good, very good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. Always good to see you. And Conrad Bauer, go on to part 2. Thanks for coming. There might be a double in here because I didn't have time to proof watch it. I had to put it together rather quickly. But these are all the little clips that I've recorded from Wal over the years. I will leave links within 24 hours.
From their stars where they couldn't have formed within the age of the star. All of the impossible planets and stars being discovered are not impossible in the electric universe model. Instead, they are expected based on that model. I'll deal with this issue in my presentation on cosmology. So it explains why there are so many hot Jupiters that have been found closely orbiting a star. It explains the expulsion rings and many satellites of the gas giant planets in our solar system, and the fact that Saturns are the most spectacular indicates that it was the last or most recent gas giant to flare up and eject matter. Right. Axial tilt families. A simple method of identifying related objects in the solar system is to look at their axial tilts, because in the close relationship between a gas giant or a brown dwarf and its close orbiting satellites, there will generally be phase lock. The satellites all have the same face pointing towards the parent. And as these close orbiting satellites therefore will have their rotation axis aligned with the parent. Having the same degree of axial tilt, modified by precession after disturbance, like the tearing apart of the Saturnian system, that tilt to the plane of their orbits of the ecliptic should be roughly the same. And this is one way of trying to identify members of the same family, because the Sun has an adopted family. So when you look at the planets here, you've got Mars, and you've got Venus, and you've got Earth, and you've got Saturn, the main players. But Venus is the odd one out, because research shows with great certainty that it was born from proto-Saturn in a massive flare-up resulting from the initial adjustment to the present Sun's quite different electrical environment. And this is why there are all those radiating streamers, because it was born as a comet from an already cometary body. So the cometary body fissioned, and the resulting ejected body went into, it was still captured by its parent, but it too was busily discharging frantically, trying to adjust to its electrical environment. So all of the radiating streamers and the colossal Venus comet appearances can be explained by this model. Now, when Venus was ejecting material, it occurred equatorial. We were sitting underneath this chain of objects, and the streamers were coming out radiating from Venus. And this is actually what we see on Venus today. The scars are wrapped around the equator. But also, when these bodies are ejected, the main body may be spinning this way, and the material is ejected in a stream. It's given a backward kick by its parent. And the result is that the satellite initially, at least, has a backward rotation, and this is what Venus has, very slow backward rotation. It had no time. What does the star proto-Saturn mean? It means a star became the gas giant we now call Saturn. This claim is outrageous according to present-day cosmology and our understanding of stars, but it is supported by lifetimes of forensic research into the earliest recorded memories of mankind, and it is confirmed by the recognition of global prehistoric petroglyphs as representations of the many distinctive forms of plasma instability seen in the highest energy electrical discharges. It has become crystal clear that the legendary thunderbolts of the planetary gods were real, and they accompanied a major recent disturbance of the solar system. But perhaps the greatest puzzle for scholars has been the references to Saturn as the first sun. And in my home in Australia, the original inhabitants have legends of a time when there were two suns, a greater and a lesser sun. Details in their Dreamtime stories have no reference points other than in high-energy plasma experiments. They were not dreaming. My concern since I became aware of this evidence has been to make classical physics sense of Saturn as a star and to understand the sequence of events that led to the seemingly peaceful solar system we see today. So we have these big questions. Do we really have a 4.6 billion year old clockwork solar system? How do planets form? I beg your pardon? How do planets form? How did the atmosphere and ocean form? Was the past like the present? And I think from the evidence that you've seen that Dave Talbot and Nev Cochrane have provided, it certainly wasn't anything like the present. So if Saturn was a star within the memory of mankind, it throws some big questions into sharp relief. And in doing so, it throws a harsh light onto our self-satisfying fictional story of the Earth and the solar system. The origin of the solar system. Professor William McRae wrote, "It is impossible to discover the origin of the solar system by observing it now and working steadily backwards in time in order to infer the whole of its past history. The solar nebula model has no successful predictions to its name." And that's a bit of a sobering thought. Here we go, yeah. My meeting with Dr. Velikovsky, I visited him in 1979 at his home in Princeton, New Jersey. He very gracefully accepted my family as well. I've got photos of my daughters with him, but none with me. I was rather shy of asking him for a photo. But the main question then was this problem that he faced with astronomers. What don't we know about gravity? There's something really missing in our physics. Velikovsky argued that planets change orbits, exchange thunderbolts, and quickly settle into peaceful orbits. Rapid settling following chaos defies our understanding of gravitational systems, which for more than a two-body system are chaotic. As I said, if one planet departs from its normal orbit by a small amount, it will affect the others, and there's no way of restoring the original situation. The system flies apart. Our understanding of gravity and solar system mechanics is inadequate. So, we have a new cosmology. A new forensic approach to old evidence produced a recent history of the solar system that requires a critical examination of modern science instead of dogmatic rejection of evidence. The result is an entirely new cosmology, the electric universe. The history of this new cosmological paradigm goes back to Worlds in Collision in 1950. In the last chapter, Velikovsky referred to Jupiter and Saturn as stars, and I quote, "There I wrote with respect to the future that some dark star like Jupiter or Saturn may be in the path of the Sun and may be attracted to the system and cause havoc in it." That was in chapter 9, The End. Worlds in Collision comprises only the last two acts of a cosmic drama, wrote Velikovsky in Chronos, Volume 5, Number 1 in 1979. That's the Chronos issue there. And then we have Dave Talbot's remarkable reconstruction of the earlier acts in our prehistoric skies, and that was published in 1980. Then in Eon Volume 5, Number 5, in January 2000, I first published my physical model of Earth's relationship to the dark star dubbed Proto-Saturn in Stars in an Electric Universe. It had appeared earlier on my website as Other Stars, Other Worlds, Other Life in December 1999. And then we have all the books by Eduardo Cardona, and they're all there. God Star, published 2006, Metamorphic Star 2008, Primordial Star 2009, Flare Star 2011. So the evidential history is Earth and Mars were satellites orbiting a brown dwarf star. It was a very hospitable environment for life. Atmosphere, water and minerals were deposited on the satellites. The system changed spectacularly on encountering the Sun. The brown dwarf flared and ejected a new satellite. An axial column of satellites was formed, and intense plasma discharge phenomena were observed. The terms giant and dwarf applied to stars are misleading. They're just calculated on the standard model of the Sun. And the notion of a star's age based on its appearance or spectrum has no validity for the same reason. Stars on the main sequence may be characterized as self-regulating cosmic power transformers, as I spoke about this morning, that focus diffuse galactic electrical energy to catalyze fusion in their photospheres to provide radiant energy. Like the Sun, such stars derive their luminosity from very bright anode tufts in their plasma sheaths. Moving diagonally upward to the right, the current density increases. Anode tufting becomes more crowded and their mutual repulsion forces the photosphere to grow to accommodate them. At the top right of the main sequence, the light from those tufts is electric blue of a true arc, and the stars appear as blue giants, intensely hot objects appearing considerably larger than our Sun. As you might expect, blue giants tend to be concentrated on the central axes of our galaxy's spiral arm discharges. Red stars must collect more electrons than the plasma can deliver continuously to its surface, so bright anode tufts are unnecessary. The anode expands instead by forming a negative space charge sheath, and as that sheath expands, its electric field grows stronger. Electrons caught up in the field are accelerated to ever greater energies, and before long they become energetic enough to excite neutral particles they collide with in the outer sheath to take on a uniform red glow. A white dwarf is a star whose discharge current is satisfied by all the approaching electrons, drift electrons plus those that randomly move towards the anode. It has no anode tufting. It is rather like moving a low-energy corona of a main sequence star down into the atmosphere of the white dwarf star. That's why the star, the dim star, Sirius B, is brighter in X-rays than Sirius A, because the corona emits X-rays. So, what is a brown dwarf? To summarise, a red or brown dwarf can be characterised as an independent gas giant type object under low electrical stress from its galactic environment. A main sequence star is electrically stressed, so it resorts to becoming a tufted anode, which, as I said, regulates the output of the star. This is why all bright stars appear to twinkle. They don't change from day to day. Red giants are normal stars under low electrical stress. White dwarfs are stars with a low luminosity coronal discharge only. Is that at the same point? Red giants are normal stars under low electrical stress, and white dwarfs. So, size matters. Brown dwarfs come with a major drawback for astronomers. Their stellar radii are hard to determine accurately. In the electric universe, brown dwarfs are not dwarf stars. Instead, all red stars have a bloated, glowing anode sheath which expands and contracts in order to collect the amount of electrons required for that discharge. As the anode sheath grows, its electric field grows, which results in the prodigious and unexplained stellar winds from cool red giants. If the winds were due to the heat of the corona, then this puts paid to that idea. In a December 2008 NASA report, the brightness of a brown dwarf at 17 light-years distance was twice that expected for a brown dwarf with its particular temperature. The solution? The object must have twice the surface area, they said. It must be twins. Such ad hocery is unnecessary in the electric universe model. A brown dwarf's photosphere is much larger than the standard model of such stars predicts. The cradle of life. And this gets back to the idea of the Garden of Eden period in man's memory. If you're a satellite orbiting within that anode glow, and this is not an outrageous idea because astronomers have suggested the same thing for red giants, that planets could actually orbit within that star because the atmosphere is such low density. In fact, we orbit in the sun's atmosphere, if you like, and it doesn't cause us any trouble. But within that glowing shell, the radiant energy received from that envelope is constant over the entire globe. The light from the plasmasphere is not reflected light, it's radiant energy. Brown dwarfs radiate blue and ultraviolet light even though they are cool at a temperature around 950 K. This is further evidence that we are looking at a mix of an electrical red anode glow and coronal ultraviolet blue end of the spectrum. There are no seasons, no tropics and no ice caps. A planet does not have to rotate, its axis can point in any direction and its orbit can be eccentric, and you'll still get this beautiful even temperature over the whole body. The radiant energy received by the planet will be strongest at the blue and red ends of the spectrum, so photosynthesis, which relies on red light, would be very active. The skylight would be a pale purple, which maybe is referred to by the classical purple dawn of creation. And I know that in Canberra we have this new arboretum, which is fantastic, and all of the new trees that are being planted are put in red plastic to start with. And I asked the head of the arboretum why they did that, and he said the plants grow much better in red light. Water molecules dominate the spectra of brown dwarfs. So you want to know where the Earth's water came from? The light on Earth was dim and purplish amid a continuous mist of water. No other bodies in the system were visible. And this is what Dave mentioned yesterday. This explains the abundant water on Earth and many satellites of the gas giant planets and the rings of Saturn. And the red light, warmth and water was ideally suited for giant ferns. It explains the gigantic lush vegetation found at the poles, fossilised as coal. Now, the problem faced by life on planets orbiting a red star, I think you saw last thing last night, which was this flaring red dwarf. So this tendency to flare up is a problem. The reason for this is that, as I said, the red stars don't have the current regulation afforded by the bright photosphere. So the response of a red star to a sudden electrical disturbance in their environment is to shed charged matter in a flare-up. They may also change in apparent size as the anode glow accommodates to the electrical environment. I think this would account for the great dyings in the geological record and the episodic deposit of vast sediment and mineral layers on the Earth. And on other bodies too. Every body that's been looked at is layered. What's more, it explains for the first time the oceans of salty water on Earth. Comets cannot be responsible because they have little or no water and little or no sodium chloride. Now, just see how much of this I want to show you because we saw this yesterday, so I might skip. This is referring to that super flare you saw yesterday, and you remember the astrophysicist said anyone who was on a planet orbiting that star at the time would be having a very bad day. Well, I think the Earth has had its bad days, and they're reflected in the geological record. So we'll skip that. The mass extinctions. As I said, those flare-ups can be so drastic that it would practically wipe out the life on any existing life on those satellites of that dwarf star. This raises an interesting side issue, and that is, ironically, intelligent life can't communicate through such a plasma shell using radio waves. So the lack of intelligible radio signals in the SETI project is understandable. In fact, denizens of such worlds would most likely be unaware of the universe at large. Now, astronomers also submit that orbiting a red dwarf is possibly one of the best places to look for life. What they've never considered is orbiting inside a red dwarf. Let me see. I don't think I'll talk about this one. This is a recent report of a spotty brown dwarf which suggests there are things orbiting within that red anode sheath, causing a dimming of the glow behind wherever that satellite happens to be. They're calling it weather, but of course if it's an anode glow it has nothing to do with weather. So we'll skip that. So this is a picture of the brown dwarf proto-Saturn as I see it. Now there would have been many more bodies than you see there, but I've included Mars and Earth and proto-Saturn because they're the main players at this stage. 50% of red dwarfs have Earth-sized planets in their conventional habitable zone. This suggests there are a large number hidden inside the red star's glow. And you can say that too because our gas giants all have large numbers of satellites orbiting quite closely. But you'll note there is no Venus at this stage. Gigantism. It wasn't just pterodactyls that struggled to get up off the ground. Scaling of muscle and bone strength shows that dinosaurs could not have raised their bodies off the ground in today's gravity. For them to move about, Earth's gravity needed to be about 1/3 of today's. Global extinction and fossilization requires far more than a simple impact. Clearly, we have no understanding of the cause of gravity. Is gravity electrical? Gigantism in the animal kingdom. Beg your pardon. The question is of fundamental importance for cosmology and our understanding of the solar system. And the answer should provide insights into the demise of the dinosaurs, the sky our ancestors saw, and why they feared doomsday. This is the crucial thing. This is the thing I asked Velikovsky. What don't we understand about gravity? And of course we're getting confirmation of a sort from this Comet visit, because all of the measurements say it has very low mass, it can't be rock. And I'm saying no, Mars and Earth and proto-Saturn, because they're the main players at this stage. 50% of red dwarfs have Earth-sized planets in their conventional habitable zone. This suggests there are a large number hidden inside the red star's glow. And you can say that too because our gas giants all have large numbers of satellites orbiting quite closely. But you'll note there is no Venus at this stage. Gigantism. It wasn't just pterodactyls that struggled to get up off the ground. Scaling of muscle and bone strength shows that dinosaurs could not have raised their bodies off the ground in today's gravity. For them to move about, Earth's gravity needed to be about 1/3 of today's. Global extinction and fossilization requires far more than a simple impact. Clearly, we have no understanding of the cause of gravity. Is gravity electrical? Gigantism in the animal kingdom. Beg your pardon. The question is of fundamental importance for cosmology and our understanding of the solar system. And the answer should provide insights into the demise of the dinosaurs, the sky our ancestors saw, and why they feared doomsday. This is the crucial thing. This is the thing I asked Velikovsky. What don't we understand about gravity? And of course we're getting confirmation of a sort from this Comet visit, because all of the measurements say it has very low mass, it can't be rock. And I'm saying, no, you don't understand gravity. It may appear to be of low density, but it's made of rock. The terms giant and dwarf applied to stars are misleading. They're just calculated on the standard model of the Sun. And the notion of a star's age based on its appearance or spectrum has no validity for the same reason. Stars on the main sequence may be characterised as self-regulating cosmic power transformers, as I spoke about this morning. that focus diffuse galactic electrical energy to catalyse fusion in their photospheres to provide radiant energy. Like the Sun, such stars derive their luminosity from very bright anode tufts in their plasma sheaths. Moving diagonally upward to the right, the current density increases. Anode tufting becomes more crowded and their mutual repulsion forces the photosphere to grow to accommodate them. At the top right of the main sequence, the light from those tufts is electric blue of a true arc, and the stars appear as blue giants, intensely hot objects appearing considerably larger than our Sun. As you might expect, blue giants tend to be concentrated on the central axes of our galaxy's spiral arm discharges. Red stars must collect more electrons than the plasma can deliver continuously to its surface, so bright anode tufts are unnecessary. The anode expands instead by forming a negative space charge sheath, and as that sheath expands, its electric field grows stronger. Electrons caught up in the field are accelerated to ever greater energies, and before long they become energetic enough to excite neutral particles they collide with in the outer sheath to take on a uniform red glow. A white dwarf is a star whose discharge current is satisfied by all the approaching electrons, drift electrons plus those that randomly move towards the anode. It has no anode tufting. It is rather like moving a low-energy corona of a main sequence star down into the atmosphere of the white dwarf star. That's why the star, the dim star, Sirius B, is brighter in X-rays than Sirius A, because the corona emits X-rays. So, what is a brown dwarf? To summarise, a red or brown dwarf can be characterised as an independent gas giant type object under low electrical stress from its galactic environment. A main sequence star is electrically stressed, so it resorts to becoming a tufted anode, which, as I said, regulates the output of the star. This is why all bright stars appear to twinkle. They don't change from day to day. Red giants are normal stars under low electrical stress. White dwarfs are stars with a low luminosity coronal discharge only. Is that at the same point? Yeah, red giants are normal stars under low electrical stress. And white dwarfs. So, size matters. Brown dwarfs come with a major drawback for astronomers. Their stellar radii are hard to determine accurately. In the electric universe, brown dwarfs are not dwarf stars. Instead, all red stars have a bloated, glowing anode sheath which expands and contracts in order to collect the amount of electrons required for that discharge. As the anode sheath grows, its electric field grows, which results in the prodigious and unexplained stellar winds from cool red giants. If the winds were due to the heat of the corona, then this puts paid to that idea. In a December 2008 NASA report, the brightness of a brown dwarf at 17 light years distance was twice that expected for a brown dwarf with its particular temperature. The solution? The object must have twice the surface area, they said. It must be twins. Such ad hocery is unnecessary in the electric universe model. A brown dwarf's photosphere is much larger than the standard model of such stars predicts. The cradle of life. And this gets back to the idea of the Garden of Eden period in man's memory. If you're a satellite orbiting within that anode glow, and this is not an outrageous idea because astronomers have suggested the same thing for red giants, that planets could actually orbit within that star because the atmosphere is such low density. In fact, we orbit in the sun's atmosphere, if you like, and it doesn't cause us any trouble. But within that glowing shell, the radiant energy received from that envelope is constant over the entire globe. The light from the plasmasphere is not reflected light, it's radiant energy. Brown dwarfs radiate blue and ultraviolet light even though they are cool at a temperature around 950 K. This is further evidence that we are looking at a mix of an electrical red anode glow and coronal ultraviolet blue end of the spectrum. There are no seasons, no tropics, and no ice caps. A planet does not have to rotate, its axis can point in any direction, and its orbit can be eccentric, and you'll still get this beautiful, even temperature over the whole body. The radiate blue and ultraviolet light, even though they are cool at a temperature around 950 K. This is further evidence that we are looking at a mix of an electrical red anode glow and coronal ultraviolet blue end of the spectrum. There are no seasons, no tropics, and no ice caps. A planet does not have to rotate, its axis can point in any direction, and its orbit can be eccentric, and you'll still get this beautiful, even temperature over the whole body. The radiant energy received by the planet will be strongest at the blue and red ends of the spectrum, so photosynthesis, which relies on red light, would be very active. The skylight would be a pale purple, which maybe is referred to by the classical purple dawn of creation. And I know that in Canberra we have this new arboretum, which is fantastic, and all of the new trees that are being planted are put in red plastic to start with, and I asked the head of the arboretum why they did that, and he said the plants grow much better in red light. Water molecules dominate the spectra of brown dwarfs, so you want to know where the Earth's water came from? The light on Earth was dim and purplish amid a continuous mist of water. No other bodies in the system were visible. This is what Dave mentioned yesterday. This explains the abundant water on Earth and many satellites of the gas giant planets and the rings of Saturn. And the red light, warmth and water was ideally suited for giant ferns. It explains the gigantic lush vegetation found at the poles, fossilised as coal. Last thing last night, which was this flaring red dwarf. So this tendency to flare up is a problem. The reason for this is that, as I said, the red stars don't have the current regulation afforded by the bright photosphere. So the response of a red star to a sudden electrical disturbance in their environment is to shed charged matter in a flare-up. They may also change in apparent size as the anode glow accommodates to the electrical environment. I think this would account for the great dyings in the geological record and the episodic deposit of vast sediment and mineral layers on the Earth. And on other bodies too. Every body that's been looked at is layered. What's more, it explains for the first time the oceans of salty water on Earth. Comets cannot be responsible because they have little or no water and little or no sodium chloride. Now, just see how much of this I want to show you, because we saw this yesterday, so I might skip. This is referring to that super flare you saw yesterday, and you remember the astrophysicist said anyone who was on a planet orbiting that star at the time would be having a very bad day. Well, I think the Earth has had its bad days, and they're reflected in the geological record. So we'll skip that. A physical characteristic that links a captured star with its offspring. It is the axial tilts. Like our close-orbiting moon, satellites tend to orbit their primary with the same face always turned toward it. If they orbit in the equatorial plane, their spin axis will be aligned with that of the primary. As gyroscopes, the satellites will retain the same tilt even if jolted from their orbit, although the process may induce a wobble of the spin axis. It is therefore highly significant that the two key planets identified in the ancient pantheons, Saturn and Mars, have axial tilts closely similar to that of the Earth. The tilt of Saturn at 27 degrees to the ecliptic plane is itself an enigma, unless it formed independently from the Sun. Venus was described as a spectacular discharging body in the ancient congregation of planets. It can be explained if Venus was ejected in the flare-up of Proto-Saturn and the infall of the stream of ejected matter from swiftly rotating Proto-Saturn gave Venus a slow retrograde spin. The magnitude of the axial tilt of Venus to the ecliptic is much less than Saturn's, which suggests that Venus was ejected from a low latitude. This accounts for the hellish temperature and new surface of Venus. having been recently spat from the mantle of a brown dwarf star. Its filamentary equatorial scars caused by spectacular radial discharging, and its thick atmosphere inherited from the brown dwarf and subsequently modified by interplanetary and cometary discharges. Venus still has a cometary magnetotail stretching to the Earth's orbit, and its mountaintops glow with plasma discharges, which return Magellan's radar signals as unexplained shininess. Magellan's radar also showed Venus has a surprisingly young surface that gave rise to ad hoc theories of resurfacing events. They're unnecessary. Venus is a baby. Since my predictions were written in 2004, the electrogravity model has been further developed, and it explains electrogravitational capture and the rounding of cometary orbits by electrical discharge. It explains the huge capture cross-section of stars and why the observed phenomenal discharging of cometary Venus caused it to finally have the most circular orbit of any planet. The electric universe conceptual model can claim a number of successful predictions. Significantly, it was the only model to predict the surface features of smog-shrouded Titan before the Huygens probe revealed them in detail. Titan, which is 50% larger than our Moon, is an enigma for astronomers, having a global orange haze that has prevented us from seeing surface features. It has a massive atmosphere, mainly of nitrogen, with a pressure at the surface like that at the bottom of a swimming pool. The atmosphere also contains methane and at least 9 other organic molecules. The methane is being continually destroyed by solar radiation, which raises a further problem about its source of resupply if the Moon is 4.6 billion years old. This has led to widespread speculations of Titan possibly being covered by an approximately 1 kilometre deep ocean of liquid ethane. However, radar, infrared and radio observations of Titan have not found signs of a hydrocarbon ocean. In fact, one radar return was of a type that we would expect to get back from Venus. But Titan is not 4.6 billion years old, and the Earth did not form where we find it today. Instead, Saturn's largest moon, Titan, is a child of Saturn and a sibling of Venus, Earth and Mars. I wrote just before Cassini arrived at Saturn, we should be alert to similarities between Titan and Venus. On November 29, 2006, the Dallas Morning News reported, when the $3 billion Cassini spacecraft sailed past Titan 3 weeks ago, it was supposed to clear up many of the mysteries about Saturn's largest moon. Instead, it has left scientists more befuddled. The new Cassini images do not support previous theories about Saturn's moon. In New Scientist of November 6, 2004, Titan images add to Moon's mystery, Stephen Battersby reported. The world got its first peek at the surface of Saturn's moon Titan last week. The images were taken as NASA's Cassini-Huygens spacecraft swept past the moon. The images show a landscape that is clearly still being shaped. Although Titan must have suffered numerous meteor impacts in the past, its surface today is largely crater-free. Somehow these scars must have been eroded or filled in. We are seeing a place that is alive, geologically speaking, says Charles Ilachi, head of the team running Cassini's radar instrument. I commented at the time, that is precisely what was said about Venus when the Magellan orbiter revealed that planet's surface. It is only supposition that Titan's surface is still being shaped. It's based on the Titan must have suffered numerous meteor impacts in the past. Its surface today is largely crater-free. Somehow these scars must have been eroded or filled in. We are seeing a place that is alive, geologically speaking, says Charles Ilachi, head of the team running Cassini's radar instrument. I commented at the time, that is precisely what was said about Venus when the Magellan orbiter revealed that planet's surface. It is only supposition that Titan's surface is still being shaped. It's based on the belief that Titan must have suffered numerous meteor impacts in the past, and therefore something must have occurred from within the moon to fill the craters. However, like Venus, there may have been no impact craters to fill. For that matter, no one has witnessed a large crater-forming meteor impact. The report continued, Suggestions of an active dynamic surface on Titan are beginning to emerge. Not a single crater has been identified yet, which means the surface must be young and active. One large circular feature, suspected of being a crater until closer examination showed it to be flat, closely resembles the pancake domes seen on Venus that are produced by magma welling up to produce a bubble that then slumps down to a nearly flat profile. Other features resemble the lobes of some surface lava flows. We don't understand what we're looking at. Titan is going to be a real challenge. My comment was, the surprise about the lack of craters and Titan's apparent active dynamic surface mirrors the comments made about Venus when radar images were first returned. The large, flat, circular feature on Titan does resemble the pancake dome seen on Venus. However, these domes were not formed by volcanic action. It would require an unacceptably large number of coincidences to produce such circularity in just one of these domes. The surface must be absolutely horizontal and the flow from the central vent must be perfectly even in all horizontal directions. But there are many domes on Venus. In the electric universe model, the domes are more simply explained as the raised blisters sometimes caused by lightning. Small-scale circular raised blisters have been found following a negative cloud-to-ground lightning strike to a lightning conductor cap. They're called fulgurites. A test of this hypothesis would be to determine if the surface around these domes is sunken. Fulgurites show this characteristic borrow pit effect where the material has been drawn inwards and upwards by the intense discharge to form the raised blister. It is not something to be expected from a volcanic upwelling. Inexplicably, in terms of the volcanic model, where two domes overlap, the relief of the underlying dome doesn't disturb the overriding dome. This and the chain formation seen above is typical of electrical scarring in general, where one crater is often centered on the rim of another, with little disturbance of the existing crater. With fulgurites, one mound often occurs on top of another as a result of multiple strokes within the lightning flash. So it seems that the images of Titan's surface returned by Cassini so far are predictable based on forensic evidence that we should be alert to similarities between Titan and Venus. This brings us to the other major puzzle about Titan, its atmosphere. Titan's atmosphere is believed by many scientists to be similar to Earth's early atmosphere, billions of years ago. Toby Owens, principal scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, said, "What we've got is a very primitive atmosphere that has been preserved for 4.6 billion years. Titan gives us the chance for cosmic time travel, going back to the very earliest days of Earth when it had a similar atmosphere." From New Scientist, November 6, Titan appears to have lost much of its original atmosphere. The Moon has an unusually high abundance of nitrogen-15 compared with the lighter isotope nitrogen-14. That could be explained if most of the atmosphere had evaporated into space, a process in which the nitrogen-14 would have escaped more easily than nitrogen-15. What could cause such a loss is unknown, but it would mean that Titan once had an atmosphere 40 times as thick as Earth's, making it a dwarf version of a gas planet. This bizarre world may be far more complex than we have begun to imagine, says Larry Soderblom of the US Geological Survey in Flagstaff, Arizona. My comment was, Titan's atmosphere is primitive, but not in the sense that it remains 4.6 billion years old. Instead, there has not been time for young Titan to lose much atmosphere. If Titan, like Venus, is a young, recently ejected body, it may still be cooling from its natal heat. And, like Venus, it has a super-rotating wind. The striking disparity in nitrogen isotopes is telling us something about the way planetary atmospheres are formed, rather than how they evolve. There are several processes during birth in an electrical discharge that will have significant effects on planetary atmospheres, including that of Titan. The primary effect comes from the source and depth of the ejection from the flaring parent dwarf star or gas giant. The chemical elements in the discharge are then sorted according to their critical ionization velocity. Also, isotopes will tend to separate in the magnetic field of the plasma discharge. Lastly, the plasma gun effect seen now ejecting material from Io's so-called volcanoes into space, is known in the laboratory to be a copious source of neutrons. The neutrons may be captured to form heavy isotopes and radioactive elements. The variable combination of all these effects suggests that it would be unlikely for any two bodies in the same family to have identical initial atmospheres. Subsequent electrical interactions between planets and moons would also serve to transfer surface materials and atmospheres, transmute elements, and further complicate the picture. That fits generally with the irregular elemental and isotopic signatures found in the atmospheres of our planetary system. For example, nitrogen in lunar soils is 10 times more abundant than one may expect from the concentrations of solar wind rare gases. Subsequent electrical interactions between planets and moons would also serve to transfer surface materials and atmospheres, transmute elements, and further complicate the picture. That fits generally with the irregular elemental and isotopic signatures found in the atmospheres of our planetary system. For example, nitrogen in lunar soils is 10 times more abundant than one may expect from the concentrations of solar wind rare gases. There are some other mechanisms that could also contribute to the lack of nitrogen-14 in Titan's atmosphere. For example, nitrogen-14 can capture an electron to become carbon-14. Carbon-14 decays by very weak beta decay back to nitrogen-14 with a half-life of approximately 5,730 years. If the age of Titan's atmosphere can be measured in tens or hundreds of thousands of years instead of billions, then a significant amount of nitrogen-14 may still be locked up as carbon-14, contributing perhaps to the hydrocarbons in Titan's atmosphere and on its surface. To suggest Titan once had an atmosphere 40 times as thick as Earth's, making it a dwarf version of a gas planet, only complicates the plainly impossible standard model of formation of the solar system. Why don't other large moons in the outer solar system have substantial residual atmospheres? It seems far more plausible to suggest that Titan is a much newer moon than Jupiter's Ganymede or Callisto. Titan simply hasn't had time to lose its heavy atmosphere, just as Saturn hasn't had time to lose its rings following its last discharge. In this picture, we now have the key to understanding what shapes Titan's landscape, said Dr. Martin Tomasco, principal investigator for the Descent Imager Spectral Radiometer, adding, geological evidence for precipitation, erosion, mechanical abrasion, and other fluvial activity says that the physical processes shaping Titan are much the same as those shaping Earth. These comments demonstrate the problem of interpretation when the model is geocentric. Methane is a non-polar molecule which doesn't form clouds and rain like electrically polarized water molecules do. So precipitation, erosion, and other fluvial activity will not occur, much the same as those shaping Earth. Finally, returning to Venus, why is its atmosphere so different to the other planets and Titan? The atmosphere of Venus is mostly carbon dioxide, 96.5% by volume. Most of the remaining 3.5% is nitrogen. This inhospitable mix is accompanied by clouds of sulfuric acid. I explained in my 2004 article, Venus probably began with an atmosphere more like Titan's and the Earth's, where nitrogen dominates and with more water. On the Venusian surface, nitrogen molecules require very little energy to transmute to carbon monoxide molecules by a catalytic surface nuclear reaction in the presence of red-hot iron. The brilliant French chemist Louis Couvrin, when investigating carbon monoxide poisoning of welders, discovered this surprising transmutation. The carbon monoxide then reacts at the hot surface of Venus with water vapor to form carbon dioxide and hydrogen in a well-known industrial process. The hydrogen produced escapes from Venus. This process explains the puzzling discovery made by Venus landers that the water vapor concentration diminished as they approached the Venusian surface. But decisively, it explains the heavy carbon dioxide atmosphere and little remaining nitrogen on Venus. It also explains the steady stream of hydrogen escaping from the top of Venus's atmosphere at present and the phenomenally high proportion, 120 times that on Earth, of heavy hydrogen or deuterium left behind in its atmosphere. What I've attempted to show here is a coherent story using forensic evidence stretching back into prehistory of celestial events involving planets and their electrical thunderbolt interactions. A new picture of the universe results from paying heed to Alfvén's warning to introduce electric universe science into cosmology. This is a fundamental shift from the ad hoc theoretical approach, which has no theory explaining the force of gravity, and so, unsurprisingly, no success trying to introduce order into a chaos of anomalies. It has no chance of ever discovering that we are children of the planet and former brown dwarf star, Saturn. This is an invitation to the greatest adventure, to begin to understand our real history and place in the universe for the first time, and that must bring about a much-needed cultural change that may dwarf the scientific revolution. That change is essential if we are to have a future, because the post-traumatic stress disorder we've inherited threatens our very existence on this planet. It manifests as a desire not to know the shocking truth because it exposes our existential fears. As Roger Westcott ably expressed it, man is a wounded animal. His survival is astonishing, but his inability to heal his wounds is tragic. It is tragic because, as Velikovsky argued, being descendants of the survivors of great paroxysms of nature of the past, we are possessed by the urge inherited through racial memory to repeat the violent performance. And it was his greatest fear that we now had the destructive capability to produce our own doomsday. Along with that genius Carl Jung, he warned that mankind is his own worst enemy. So the cultural change offered by electric universe cosmology is essential for our survival. By offering a real understanding of the universe and our history, it offers hope and inspiration where presently there is none. There is far more to life in the electric universe than is dreamt of presently. We are all intimately connected with each other and the Earth. Enjoy the Saturnian Festival of Lights and the New Year. Has a surprisingly young surface that gave rise to ad hoc theories of resurfacing events. They're unnecessary. Venus is a baby. Since my predictions were written in 2004, the electrogravity model has been further developed, and it explains electrogravitational capture and the rounding of cometary orbits by electrical discharge. It explains the huge capture cross-section of stars and why the observed phenomenal discharging of cometary Venus caused it to finally have the most circular orbit of any planet.
It was Velikovsky's claim that only a few thousand years ago, a period of chaos reigned in the solar system. One of the planets closely associated with Earth was Saturn, and watery filaments rained on our planet following Saturn's violent flare-up. Decades later, based on the respective research of Dave Talbot and Eduardo Cardona, Thornhill developed his own model of a primordially close relationship between Earth and Saturn, which was the source of all the water in our oceans, while leaving remnants in its rings. Today, Thornhill continues his presentation, shifting his focus to his own successful predictions for the Saturnian system, including the mysterious moon Titan.
Before I tell the epic story, a warning. Our education systems train students to memorize a litany of facts, which produces global groupthink. Students are not given the time or encouragement to critically examine the history of ideas. A leading researcher into the learning functions of the divided brain, Dr. Ian McGilchrist, has shown such blinkered left hemisphere training renders students functionally blind to alternative ways of looking at a problem. The left hemisphere simply blocks out everything that doesn't fit with its take. It doesn't see it, actually, at all. So scientists with their narrow, specialized training may look at but cannot see what to a non-expert may seem obvious. They will be the last to see a paradigm shift in the making. This is particularly evident for electrical phenomena in space. Even the Nobel Prize-winning founder of the idea of an electric universe, Hans Wolfgang, was ignored when he warned in his 1970 acceptance speech of an inevitable crisis in astrophysics if electric circuits in space are not recognized. Houston, we still have that problem after almost 50 years. I have lived since a teenager with uncertainty about accepted truths and learned to have the courage to challenge them. The result is not chaos, but a synthesis of ideas that explains the old ideas better and finds new ways of incorporating what seems a chaos of anomalies. And the best test is that of classical physics, simplification. The resulting paradigm shift is not a threat, but an invitation to the greatest adventure we may ever know, to begin to understand our real place in the universe for the first time. In our electric universe, stars and planets are formed at the same time inside molecular clouds, along a snaking cosmic lightning bolt. Gravity plays no role in the process. Since cosmic lightning takes the form of a twisted pair of current filaments, it is found that most stars are in pairs, or multiples. Planets will tend to do the same. Like the snaking filaments in a novelty plasma ball, the star-forming filament moves on, leaving a string of massive objects behind to gravitationally form the weird and theoretically challenging zoo of exoplanetary systems recently discovered. Some gas giant planets are subsequently formed in close orbits about a star that has ejected charged matter to achieve stability with a changed electrical environment. The ejection flares may account for the flickering of newborn stars, which can't be explained by gravitational accretion. This explains the unexpected hot Jupiters seen in large numbers closely orbiting other stars. The most numerous stars in the galaxy, brown dwarfs, which would appear reddish if they could be seen with the naked eye, are generally classed as failed stars, yet they have the baffling ability to produce massive stellar flares. This is simply explained because red stars don't have the ability of main-sequence bright stars to control their current by a transistor-like action in their photospheric plasma. A brown dwarf can only respond by discharging matter electrically. The capture process of a brown dwarf star involves flaring and ejection of charged matter by that body in order to achieve a new electrical equilibrium in its adopted family. That accounts for the large number of close-orbiting moons of our captured gas giants in remote orbits. With this in mind, I want to take you back to just before the famous Cassini-Huygens space probe was to arrive at Saturn on July 1st, 2004. In news reports, Saturn was dubbed the original Lord of the Rings. There is a profound truth behind such a glib turn of phrase, but it wasn't until the advent of the telescope that Christian Huygens in 1656 was able to suggest that Saturn had a ring. So how do we explain the Saturnian ring symbolism that pervades our cultures? The halo of the saints, the royal crown, and the ring given in marriage are Saturnian symbols, as are the circled or Celtic cross, the Egyptian Ansate cross or Ankh, the Eye of Ra, and the astronomically baffling star inside the crescent. The star at the top of the lighted Christmas tree is pure Saturnian imagery. It is truly amazing that we are still haunted by prehistoric archetypes. It helps us to understand the extraordinary archetypal attraction of Tolkien's fantasy of Lord of the Rings. He was well versed in mythology. The following description of events is based on the surprisingly detailed and truly remarkable scholarship of Talbot and Cardona, which required explanations with the physics of an electric universe. Let's call our primordial star Proto-Saturn. It was an independent brown dwarf with its own entourage of satellites, including the Earth, Mars, and Titan. Proto-Saturn's dim reddish light was due to a glowing red anode plasma sheath, much larger than the Sun, enclosing Proto-Saturn and its inner satellites in a radiant cell. The term dwarf star is purely theoretical, since they are difficult to see and measure. In fact, NASA reported a brown dwarf which was radiating as if it had twice the expected surface area. The environment inside the radiant red shell is most hospitable for life on any enclosed satellites because there are no seasons and water is conspicuous in the spectra of such stars. Water misted down on this planet continually, and red light is ideal for photosynthesis, which explains the abundance of ferns and other vegetation globally in the Carboniferous era. But there is a catch. Brown dwarf stars are known to flare, sometimes to the extent, as one astronomer commented, that any satellites would suffer a very bad day. Such flaring by proto-Saturn accounts for the geological strata and the fossil record of a number of global mass extinctions and instant burial of dismembered plant and animal remains. As we approached the Sun from deep space, our plasma sheath flickered like a faulty electric light when the two stellar plasma sheaths, or magnetospheres, began to clash. Proto-Saturn's galactic electrical power was usurped by the Sun, and its appearance changed dramatically. Before dimming forever, the dwarf star Proto-Saturn would have flared brilliantly like a comet, ejecting charged matter to relieve the electrical stresses caused by the sudden change in environment. Even now the former star has not completely cooled. Saturn still radiates more than twice the heat it receives from the Sun. And we have a simple explanation for the origin of Saturn's mysteriously short-lived water ice rings. As the proto-Saturnian system approached the Sun in the outer solar system, our minor star's gravitational sphere of influence steadily shrank, and its outer satellites were progressively stripped away. This and the earlier capture of the other gas giants provides the source of trans-Neptunian objects as they're known, including Pluto with its unexpected geology and atmosphere, and its peculiar moons. There is a simple physical characteristic that links a captured star with its offspring. It is the axial tilts. Like our close-orbiting moon, satellites tend to orbit their primary with the same face always turned toward it. If they orbit in the equatorial plane, their spin axis will be aligned with that of the primary. As gyroscopes, the satellites will retain the same tilt even if jolted from their orbit, although the process may induce a wobble of the spin axis. It is therefore highly significant that the two key planets identified in the ancient pantheons, Saturn and Mars, have axial tilts closely similar to that of the Earth. The tilt of Saturn at 27 degrees to the ecliptic plane is itself an enigma, unless it formed independently from the Sun. Venus was described as a spectacular discharging body in the ancient congregation of planets. It can be explained if Venus was ejected in the flare-up of Proto-Saturn and the infall of the stream of ejected matter from swiftly rotating Proto-Saturn gave Venus a slow retrograde spin. The magnitude of the axial tilt of Venus to the ecliptic is much less than Saturn's, which suggests that Venus was ejected from a low latitude. This accounts for the hellish temperature and new surface of Venus, having been recently spat from the mantle of a brown dwarf star. Its filamentary equatorial scars caused by spectacular radial discharging, and its thick atmosphere inherited from the brown dwarf and subsequently modified by interplanetary and cometary discharges. Venus still has a cometary magnetotail stretching to the Earth's orbit, and its mountaintops glow with plasma discharges, which return Magellan's radar signals as unexplained shininess. Using forensic evidence stretching back into prehistory behind in its atmosphere. What I've attempted to show here is a coherent story using forensic evidence stretching back into prehistory of celestial events involving planets and their electrical thunderbolt interactions. A new picture of the universe results from paying heed to Alfvén's warning to introduce electric universe science into cosmology. This is a fundamental shift from the ad hoc theoretical approach, which has no theory explaining the force of gravity, and so, unsurprisingly, no success trying to introduce order into a chaos of anomalies. It has no chance of ever discovering that we are children of the planet and former brown dwarf star, Saturn. This is an invitation to the greatest adventure, to begin to understand our real history and place in the universe for the first time. and that must bring about a much-needed cultural change that may dwarf the scientific revolution. That change is essential if we are to have a future, because the post-traumatic stress disorder we've inherited threatens our very existence on this planet. It manifests as a desire not to know the shocking truth because it exposes our existential fears. As Roger Westcott ably expressed it, man is a wounded animal. His survival is astonishing, but his inability to heal his wounds is tragic. It is tragic because, as Velikovsky argued, being descendants of the survivors of great paroxysms of nature of the past, we are possessed by the urge inherited through racial memory to repeat the violent performance. And it was his greatest fear that we now had the destructive capability to produce our own doomsday. Along with that genius Carl Jung, he warned that mankind is his own worst enemy. So the cultural change offered by electric universe cosmology is essential for our survival. By offering a real understanding of the universe and our history, it offers hope and inspiration where presently there is none. There is far more to life in the electric universe than is dreamt of presently. We are all intimately connected with each other and the Earth. Enjoy the Saturnian Festival of Lights and the New Year.
The reason that the corona there looks like it's only on one side is because the anode is photosphere. There they are. They don't like each other. It's like a bunch of kabuki warriors pushing each other away. They're all positive, and they're all looking for advantage and not finding it. You might hear Monty's voice in the background if they have the audio on. He's increased the current. The tufts have begun to go into this. I know whether it's a high glow mode or that's arc mode. You can see now, it's a better model, that you can see the sunspots. Sunspots are where there are no tufts. There's something that he's got the excitation such that it looks like the chromosphere. That little black thing in the bottom, I guess, Michael can tell me whether is that the spectroscopic probe or it's a probe of some sort. There's the corona. The ring around the outside is the cathode. And of course, in the sapphire model, you need a cathode. But in real space, of course, the cathode is a virtual cathode. But there's the corona. The reason that the corona there looks like it's only on one side is because the anode is...
Plasma operates in what is called dark mode in many cases, but it, unlike dark matter or energy, can be detected by radio telescopes. Plasma is significantly defined as the fourth state of matter, but it is only because it was the last to be discovered. In actuality, it is the first state of matter. Plasma was termed by Irving Langmuir, who won the Nobel Prize, and he named it plasma because it reminded him of blood plasma, and it seemed alive. An example of plasma would be a fluorescent light or a flame, which needs some kind of starter to get it going. Then there's normal glow mode. There is another mode called arc mode, like in welding, which again needs to be started with an electrical difference, which drops when it begins to operate. At that point, the air breaks down to become a conductive plasma. And this thing called the pinch effect, it has been reproduced in laboratories because the beauty of the electric universe is that the plasma operates the same in tiny experiments or galactic interactions. The pinch effect of the electric current is what forms galaxies, and also within those galaxies create the stars. The pinch effect is powering the galaxy, and then down to the stars, and then actually power the stars themselves with these things called anode tufts. Wal Thornhill has made an analogy that, seen from space, one might think that a bright city would be powered from within, but actually it is being powered by invisible lines from power stations sometimes hundreds of miles away. The sun works on this premise. Now the solar wind, as it recedes from the sun, accelerates, and it is actually an electric current and not a wind. So it has been misnamed. But there is also a problem with the standard models missing the neutrinos. As it is known, when you combine 4 hydrogen atoms in a nuclear reaction, they have to get what is called a neutrino. So there must be all of these neutrinos coming from the sun, but they're not finding them. anywhere near the amount they need, which should be being generated at the core.
Compress on to cause its thermal temperature to be around 15 million degrees. And that it's this pressure that is responsible for the nuclear reactions causing fusion, and that through various ways this energy migrates and finally escapes through the layers of the sun, creating the photosphere, which is cooler at about 6,000 degrees Celsius. And then further on out to the corona, where the temperature again rises up to around 2 million degrees. But this is one of many disparities that heliophysicists have spent years working on to discover. Why does the sun shine?
Hurry if you would. It's almost there. Yeah, discharge from the stem, but it's fine.
So we have these anodes we can throw out. And that was day 2. So we thought that was pretty cool too. We thought, okay, we've got some good news, and now we can go to the conference. And then
the spicules of the sun have to be investigated from a new vantage point, and so much of this has to do with the interfacial dynamics of different plasma regions and charged particles being launched into higher regions and so on. And both Don Scott and Wal Thornhill place a great emphasis on the study of the spicule dynamics.
Solar electrical effects. The sun's surface is carpeted with complex magnetic fields. Only electricity can produce magnetic fields, therefore the sun must be understood in terms of electric circuits. Where are these circuits and what creates them? And what sustains them? Plasma physicists know that the movement of different types of plasma past one another will generate currents in the plasma. When you get back to first causes, we do not know. We don't even know the right questions to ask at this stage of our ignorance, I would suggest. Sunspots are an embarrassment in the thermonuclear model. They have powerful magnetic fields with the same polarity spots clumped together. Now, normally the same polarity magnetic fields push one another apart. However, the magnetic field here is a signature of the Birkeland currents piercing the photosphere. And the pinch effect means the magnetic field is very intense in sunspots. They are drawn together because parallel currents attract. It's as simple as that. Ampere's law. Their darkness, structure and behaviour have required great ingenuity in attempts to explain them, yet they remain mysterious. I asked the question, does this sunspot penumbra, this is where you can see, edge on to the photosphere and look deeper into the atmosphere, or the ionosphere I should say, of the sun. And I asked this question, does this sunspot penumbra look like turbulent boiling hot gas? And I would say not. It has structure, it has a motion which doesn't look like boiling material coming up from the interior of the sun. And why is the sunspot dark if the sun is hotter beneath? It should be blindingly bright because we're trying to get that 15 million degrees energy out through this hole which is looking deeper into the ionosphere of the sun. The simplest answer is that the sun is thousands of degrees cooler below. And remember I said stars are formed with cool cores? They're not formed with hot cores. They could never have any nuclear reactions in their core under those conditions. Here we come back to Birkeland. This man was amazing. He wrote, it might be imagined that the interior of the sun formed a positive pole for enormous electric currents. So there's your electric sun. This assumption has the advantage of appearing to give a natural explanation of the movement of the sunspots in various latitudes. This experiment has been repeated back in the 60s, and depending on the current input, those spots move in latitude, which is exactly what we see. So the sunspot movement across the latitudes on the sun is a measure of the changing input to the power input to the sun. In this case, he wrote, the origin of the sunspots must be that the presumptive, more or less insulating photospheric envelope was sometimes pierced by disruptive discharges. I couldn't believe it when I read that. Thus forming great electric arcs. I would say he was the first one to actually tell you what a sunspot is. And that was from his huge tomes called the Norwegian Aurora Polaris Expedition, published in 1902-1903. What do we find today? This is the sun in ultraviolet light, and you can see that we have an equatorial view at the top and a polar view at the bottom. And it has a plasma torus about it, and this is exactly what Birkeland had found in his experiments, that you get a plasma torus, and it's a storage ring, it stores energy. When that energy gets to a certain level, a massive discharge will take place from that torus to the surface of the body, and it follows the magnetic field lines. In the extreme case, when there's too much energy in that ring, it may actually switch to a polar jet. Many stars have polar jets. I suggest that these long filaments in the penumbra are actually electrical tornadoes thousands of kilometres long. They have bright edges, dark cores and a twisted appearance. And there's a special effects fire here with a helicopter engine above, and fire is injected at the bottom. And you can see the bright edges here and the dark core. And you can see these filaments here. It's exactly what they've got. And bright lightning flecks the tops of the granules. These are the solar granules that we see covering the sun. So the sunspot cycle, you see the sun in X-rays and it is a variable star. It almost winks out at solar minimum, and at solar maximum it is much brighter. And X-rays are a direct measure of electrical activity. The sun is connected to a galactic circuit which is subject to quasi-cyclical change, so that the origin of the sunspot cycle is beyond the solar system. It may be due to alphane waves in the Birkeland currents that feed the solar system, or it could be due to the actual motion and rotary motion of the Birkeland currents past the heliosphere. Seen in X-rays, the sun is a variable star, and yet the heat and light from the sun is constant to within 1/10 of 1%. An explanation is very important, for it explains why most bright stars shine steadily. And it's not like the 4th of July. An electric sun, this is something that Don Scott pointed out, because he's an electrical engineer and knows this stuff inside out. He said this voltage curve here across the photospheric tufts, those long filaments that we saw a moment ago, is that of a PNP transistor. In other words, this tufted sheath of our sun forms a barrier for protons escaping the sun, because those protons trying to escape the sun have to climb this barrier here before they can go down this waterfall and excite the corona to its tens of millions of degrees temperatures. And beyond here, there's a slight electrical field, just enough to accelerate the solar wind the way we see it. Of course, this then is a regulating mechanism, because just a small shift in voltage up and down here is enough to modulate the power output that passes through these tufts. And that is the regulating mechanism for all bright stars that have a photosphere. That's why they shine steadily in the night sky. There is no regulating mechanism for a thermonuclear model star. In fact, they're the most unstable things you could imagine, because some of the reactions vary with temperature to the 5th power. Here are these strange things called spicules, and Ralph Jurgens didn't shrink from trying to explain these as well. And it turns out that to maintain a steady discharge through that tufted sheath, there has to be a balance between the number of electrons travelling one direction and the number of positive ions going in the other. And these spicules actually provide the material to be ionised in the chromosphere and maintain a steady discharge. There's an analogue in some arc lamps, the kinds of things used in searchlights. They had porous anodes to actually produce this steady arc. Don Scott, this is his diagram from his book, The Electric Sky. It's the solar transformer. The greatest puzzle of the sun, its magnetic field reversals, is solved. The sun has magnetic fields induced by a varying DC power input, and so acts like a power transformer with an impressed DC current as well. So all you've got is a varying DC current, which is driving the sun. Remarkably, once again, here he is, Christian Birkeland proposed that solar magnetism was caused by electric currents induced in the conductive interior of the sun. Hey presto. He should have got a Nobel Prize, several of them. Solar neutrinos match the no thermonuclear engine inside the sun. It's not important, but it's just one of the questions that arise. The neutrinos produced in the dense photospheric plasma, because these are pinches, is where the nuclear synthesis takes place. So stars produce their own heavy elements. You don't have to have supernova explosions to do it. The supernova explosion actually distributes the material that the star has already formed. A neutrino count falls when the sunspots reduce the photospheric area. So the higher the number of sunspots, the lower the number of neutrinos, which is what you'd expect if this second point is correct. So we need not assume a change in flavour of neutrinos, whatever that means. In other words, a change in resonance state of the neutrino en route from the solar core, because the reactions in those plasma filaments is much more complex than the standard hydrogen to hydrogen chain reaction would provide. Now, stellar and planetary structure and composition are based upon the erroneous conviction that Newtonian big G is a universal constant. So when I say that this sun has a heavy element core, of course the helioseismologists would say, but our models show that it hasn't. But they're basing their model on a completely erroneous idea about the amount of matter in our star or any celestial body. If big G is a variable dependent upon the electrical state or the electrical tension in a body like the sun, then we cannot say what it's made of. We have no way of knowing except by observing material that comes from it. And if the sun is cool, there is a radial internal electric field to be considered because, as I said before, all the positive charges are heavier than the negative charges. So in a gravitational field there would be an offset and a radial electric field, so all celestial bodies behave like electrets. These internal electric fields can actually respond to disturbances and cause the ejection of large quantities of core material. In other words, form planets and moons and so on. The electric sun has a completely different picture. Here we have a cool core, we have an extensive atmosphere and an ionosphere at the top, and at the very top of that ionosphere is this global lightning or electrical tornado system, packed cheek by jowl. Then above that you have the energy flow, and of course it's normal to expect that incoming electrical energy will excite the plasma out here first, and then as it gets into the more dense atmosphere it will exhibit discharge activity. Out here it's a coronal glow, in here it's normal electric arc phenomena. So the energy to heat the electric sun comes externally from the galaxy. The electric discharge becomes intense close to the sun, heating the thin atmosphere of the corona to millions of degrees, and the superheated corona is a familiar glow discharge phenomenon recognised by high voltage engineers. Now we come to the HR diagram. It's based on observations, it's not based on theory. It's a scatter plot, not an evolutionary plot, and the luminosity and colour of a star depends on its size and the current density at its radiating surface. Discontinuities exist. You've got white dwarfs over here, red giants here, and red and brown dwarfs, which are all discontinuous with the main sequence. These are all stars with bright photospheres, so they have that regulating mechanism. Of course, the astronomer's got it back to front. If you do a mirror image, then you have a more understandable arrangement where the stars get brighter and bluer as you increase the current density, so that you get this straight line curve, which is exactly what you'd expect. Red stars have to expand. That's both red dwarfs and red giants. They're stars which are not collecting enough electricity to satisfy the discharge, so plasma adjusts. It's like a living thing almost. It adjusts to its environment. And so it expands the anode sheath to collect enough current. And some of those anode sheaths are monstrous. You know, Betelgeuse, if that star was in our solar system, its photosphere reaches out to the orbit of Jupiter. White dwarfs, on the other hand, may be a normal-sized star, but they have no bright photosphere. Their upper atmosphere is in direct contact with the plasma of space. They have only a faint white corona. Imagine if the sun's photosphere turned off, you would see this white envelope, very faint, but very white, very high temperature in appearance. So stellar evolution is a fairy story. This is V838 Monocerotis. This erupting star transformed itself over a period of months from a small underluminous star, a little hotter than the sun, to a highly luminous, cool supergiant star undergoing rapid and complex brightness changes. This was the quote of the article describing it. The transformation defies the conventional understanding of stellar life cycles. It's a very complex story. I've been through it, the theory of it. So here's a red giant. This is actually Betelgeuse. It's 500 times the size of the sun, and it has a hot spot. You've got to ask yourself, what's a hot spot doing on a red giant star? What happens is as that envelope expands, the electric field grows stronger because it's trying to collect electrons from space. But on the other hand, positively charged particles, in other words, its stellar wind, are accelerated more strongly the other way. So you have this anomaly where these cool stars have the most powerful winds known. And if the stellar wind is being boiled off, so to speak, this doesn't make any sense at all. And Betelgeuse sports a hot spot, and I've suggested it may be above one of its poles because one of the Alphane circuits shows that one of the connections of the electric circuit is to the poles of the star. So we may be staring at one of the poles. Giants and dwarfs, the usual story is that stars consume their fuel and change to giants or dwarfs. The story is complex, unverifiable, and regularly contradicted. This is another version of the HR diagram there. And astronomers are perpetually astonished by unexpected changes in stars. This is a white dwarf system. Sirius B is the white dwarf, and Sirius A, you'll see an optical light here. Sirius A is very bright in the sky, and Sirius B is almost invisible, and it's a faint white, so-called white dwarf. Now, if you look at it in X-rays, it's the reverse. Here's Sirius B, it's brighter than its optically bright partner Sirius A. This is what you'd expect, where the discharge reaches into the ionosphere directly of a star. The X-ray output is high, the visual light output is low. There's nothing special about that. It can be an ordinary star, it's just that its partner may have usurped most of the current. It's supposed to be a collapsed star at the end of its fuel. But how how can an old and a young star be together? Because here you have an old and a young star, so to speak, under the conventional ideas, together. A white dwarf has no bright photosphere. Its white light and X-rays come from an intense corona. Here's the different star types, and I've shown how I think they would look. A red dwarf is actually quite large. In other words, it's like a red giant in miniature. A red dwarf was discovered, and the astronomers decided it was putting out too much light for what they assumed was a dwarf star. So they said, oh, it must be a pair of red dwarfs of exactly the same size and power output. I suggested no, it's a single red dwarf. It's just much bigger than anyone ever expected. Main sequence star, it is covered with photospheric tufting, tufted anode and a controlled discharge. Blue giants are a large star under high electrical stress. Red giants are a normal star under low electrical stress, and it develops a glowing plasma sheath. A white dwarf is a normal star in direct contact with space plasma and has low luminosity. Talking about brown dwarfs, if a brown dwarf gets close to a very bright star, the bright star is at a higher potential than the brown dwarf. That brown dwarf will actually switch off as a star and become a comet. It switches from being an anode in the discharge system to being a cathode, and there are quite distinct differences. Now, if the Earth, hypothetically here, if the Earth was a satellite of a brown dwarf, that radiating shell would be quite enormous. It could have all of the satellites of that object, that small star, orbiting within that envelope. That whole radiating envelope puts energy on the surface of any orbiting planet equally on every square metre. So that you would have no seasons, no day and night, and you'd receive ultraviolet light. This refers to what Dwight was talking about the other day with the earliest memories of mankind. It suggests that we were in this situation, and astronomers in recent years have come to the conclusion that this is the more likely place for life to thrive. Where we are now is much more precarious. So brown dwarfs don't hang out with stars because electrically it's impossible. The other thing is that these brown dwarfs, unexpectedly, they flare. They throw material off occasionally because they've got no means of controlling their discharge other than to get rid of material, matter, charged matter. So that any satellites of these brown dwarfs gets occasionally drowned in water, an atmosphere, and also solid materials to cause layering on them. Brown dwarfs flare and deposit layered minerals on their satellites. There's a few more logical leaps involved in the electric universe, and I'll just go through a few of them. I asked the question, is gravity a weak electric dipole-to-dipole force between distorted subatomic particles? And this refers to something that Velikovsky said to me when I visited him, and also to Ralph Sainsbury's view that all subatomic particles have an orbital structure, a resonant orbital structure. And as Ralph has pointed out, magnetism then is also an electric dipole-to-dipole force due to transverse distortion of electrons and protons accelerated in an electric field. If so, the electric force is the only force necessary in physics, and this goes back to the way classical physics operated by trying to reduce the number of forces and ideas. And quantum effects imply that all matter has a resonant electrical substructure. Information and energy can be stored and transferred via these matter resonances, and that has significance in biological systems too. So astrophysical and biological coherence requires universal, near-instantaneous electrical interactions. All of the so-called spooky quantum things are no longer spooky if we accept this idea. We have a return of the ether. We must have particles to be able to transfer the energy and the forces through so-called empty space. Empty space, I suggest, is full of neutrinos. Neutrinos are the lowest energy state of matter. They exhibit vanishingly small mass. They're composed of subtrons, which is what Ralph called them. They form electric dipoles, that is the neutrinos, in an electric field, and each dipole rotates in the electromagnetic field of a light wave that ties the speed of light in a vacuum to the moment of inertia of a neutrino. And neutrinos may reintroduce cause and effect to radioactive decay. At present, it's a purely statistical phenomenon. The other thing is that it also solves the difficulty of the so-called annihilation and creation of matter in particle accelerators. You cannot do it, but if the neutrinos are the substrate, they can accept energy and become a particle, and it's mirror particle. I don't use the word antiparticle because there's no such thing. It's all matter, normal matter. I put these few slides on the end because there was discussion about Venus and the transfer of charge, and I think it's important because it returns Velikovsky's gauntlet to him cordially. Velikovsky argued that planets change orbits, exchange thunderbolts, and quickly settle into peaceful orbits. Now, rapid settling after chaos defies Newton's laws, which, of course, that was the argument levelled against Velikovsky, which for more than a two-body gravitational system are chaotic anyway, so the astronomers have had to explain why we have a stable solar system. So astronomers simply ignored the gauntlet flung down by Velikovsky. Then we have Anthony Pratt and the convergence of his work with ours some few years ago. And he showed, globally, petroglyphs show to a high degree of confidence that within human existence the Earth has suffered stupendous electric discharge phenomena from the heavens. And that's a picture of one of his papers. Now, if we accept Velikovsky's gauntlet, we need to look at Newton's law of gravity again and just have a think about what it really means. You'll notice there that G, I put its dimensions there just to show that it does include mass, and if mass is a variable, then we have a problem. It is simply assumed that G is the same for all bodies in the universe. In other words, the universal gravitational constant, and that was an assumption. Stellar and planetary structure and composition is based upon this premise, but if mass is a variable, can it explain cosmic pool? The book over there is by one of the Thunderbolts team, C.J. Ransom, The Age of Velikovsky. Of course, MOND is the latest buzzword in gravity theory, the modified Newton's dynamics. I've suggested that we can have electrically modified Newtonian dynamics. I won't go through all that business there, you can see it on my website and so on. But the upshot is that the radius of the orbit of the planet is proportional to the mass of the planet if you keep the orbital energy constant and you assume the sun's G is constant, and I think that's a fair assumption. If the mass doubles, the orbital radius must double to conserve orbital energy. Now, I said earlier that all planets and stars and all celestial objects will form an electret. In other words, you have positive poles facing inwards and negative poles facing outwards. So it sets up an internal electric field. The planet acts like an electret, and any free electrons would tend to drift towards the surface. Like a subatomic particle under the stress of an electric field, the internal electrical stress modifies the apparent mass of the planet or star, and therefore its gravity. Exchanging charge at the surface through lightning, etc., changes the mass or gravity of a planet, and there is evidence for that. Coronal mass ejections, large ones which strike the Earth, actually change the rate of spin of the Earth suddenly, and then it decays back to its original speed, which is diagnostic of a change at the moment of inertia of the Earth by some means which hasn't been explained. Comet accelerations also. Cometry displays an obvious electric discharge phenomenon. Any body on an eccentric orbit about the Sun will experience discharge activity. The discharge will cause apparent non-Newtonian acceleration, and this is well known with comets. They're very hard to predict their precise return because of them. And this is because the mass of the comet is changing, something that's not taken into any account. However, gravity is still the operative force, but here we have a feedback mechanism which can modify orbits.
Saturnian configuration. I was one of the early science undergraduates in the late 50s who had read Velikovsky's works before in the halls of academia. To my surprise and profound disillusionment with quote-unquote experts, I soon discovered that this was not so. I then began to do what Dave has done and looked for further evidence, working on my own. So far as I know, I was the only science undergraduate who haunted the anthropology section of the library bookshelves. It was enough to convince me that there was a major case to be explored for a recent rearrangement of the solar system. I did not pursue the mytho-historical threads since my first love is astronomy, but I have applied the same principles in that field that Dave has done in his work. That is, pattern recognition and matching. The results have been very encouraging and interesting. I should state my prejudices concerning the present state of science. I would characterize the scientific age as being the age of Homo sapien ignoramus. To be specific about our ignorance in the areas most likely to affect the Saturnian configuration, I would list the following. Gravity. Einstein, with his geometric description of gravity, has held back understanding by the better part of a century. The most promising work in explaining gravity is being done by a handful of classical physicists who see it as a minute imbalance in electrostatic forces associated with fundamental particles. The recent announcement of the accidental discovery of gravitational shielding by a rotating superconductor seems congruent with the classical approach. It certainly could not be predicted from the current metaphysics of gravity theory. Electrical discharges. This is crucial. We do not understand what causes earthly lightning, so we are unlikely to acknowledge plasma discharges in space. The little plasma physics that astronomers are taught is flawed. The plasmas are electrically neutral and superconducting. They trap magnetic fields. So apart from gravity, magnetism is the only other force we hear about. We are told that energetic events on the Sun are due to magnetic reconnection, whatever that means. The strongest force, barring nuclear, electrical, is never mentioned. We find it easy on Earth to generate X-rays using electric discharge, but astronomers insist on nature doing it the hard way in space. It is also not generally known that electrical discharges are very efficient at removing material against gravity and dumping it into space or onto another nearby object. Stars. We do not understand what makes them tick. As Ralph Jurgens said in the 70s, practically every feature of our Sun has no business being there if it is purely a thermonuclear engine radiating into space. Magnetic fields do not occur without an associated electric current. The Sun is essentially an extended conducting plasma subject to electric stress. The phenomenon we call the Sun is purely a ball of lightning. That the Earth and other planets intercept some of the galactic plasma discharge is shown by the recent discovery of diffuse stratospheric discharges, sprites, X-rays, and gamma rays above earthly storms. This is a precise analog of the corona, X-rays, chromospheric glow discharge, and photospheric lightning. Granulations are the tops of the discharges on the Sun. The umbra of a sunspot gives us a glimpse of the true temperature of the body of the Sun. As a result of this realization, it follows that the conventional stellar evolutionary story is pure fiction. Stars are what they are because of their environment. Their variability is caused by their environment, not their internal workings. This explains the speed with which some stars change their characteristics. Heavy elements are not built up slowly in supernovae, but at the surface of all stars, in the non-thermal compression and acceleration of plasma discharges, granulations. Hence, nucleosynthesis and what little neutrino production there is fall as the sunspot number increases. The differential rotation of the Sun, its magnetic field, and the sunspot cycle are all influenced by the Sun's passage across large Birkeland currents, flowing along and defining the arms of our galaxy. Planet formation. The Laplacian theory and its variants are garbage. The Hubble Space Telescope has shown that in regions of star formation, large bodies are being shot out as if from a gun, which is peculiar if gravity is the operative force. Once again, plasma discharges provide a mechanism which can simply explain this. The view is that diffuse hydrogen and dust is efficiently scavenged and compressed by the well-known magnetic pinch effect of an electric current flowing along the arms of a galaxy. At some point, gravity takes over and stellar objects are formed. Beyond a certain size, protostars become electrically unstable in fission, spitting out some of the core and giving rise to one or more companions. So I still think that the Herbig-Haro objects might have something to do with the formation of planets as well. So there seems to be more than one way for a planet to be made. But when we're looking at planets, it's very possible that we could be looking at the core of a star, or at least a portion of it. That's interesting. This explains the predilection for stars to be found in pairs or multiples. Got that right. Not all the matter ejected from the core of a protostar may coalesce into a companion star. It may be in the form of one or a number of gas giants. The recent discovery of a Jupiter-like body orbiting very close to a nearby star argues strongly for this model and against the standard theory. A gas giant, in turn, due to either internal or external electrical disturbance, may fission, spitting out its core to give rise to the highly condensed planets, moons, asteroids, comets, etc. Cosmology. All of the above gives rise to the conviction that cosmology should be in the hands of the plasma physics experimenters, not the theorists. It is ironic that they have been chasing the holy grail of fusion power, just like the sun, when that is patently wrong. Interestingly, a recent breakthrough in fusion energy research came about in my hometown, Canberra. When the researchers configured their plasma discharge in the form of a Birkeling current ring, a precise analog of that flowing along the arms of our galaxy. But astronomers will continue to be surprised by results pouring in from space probes when their fundamental paradigms rest on Newtonian and billiard ball physics. The current paradigm has no predictive power whatsoever. The book The Big Bang Never Happened by Eric J. Lerner is a pointer to the cosmology of the 21st century. So what are the patterns that apply from all of this to the Saturnian configuration, SC? The following are some ideas. 1. The core discharge mechanism of planet formation is a plausible way to generate the SC, a string of objects with the largest near the middle. It's Saturnian configuration, SC. 2. The reliance on the degree of electrical stress in the enveloping plasma for the characteristics of the larger bodies enclosed in that plasma could see rapid changes occur, even the disruption of one of the stellar or gas giant objects. It could certainly involve jets of material being emitted by such bodies and forming a diffuse cloud enveloping the polar configuration. It could also be the destabilizing influence which finally breaks it up. 3. As seen in the high-speed objects shooting out of the Orion Nebula, plasma discharges take place in the core of a star or gas giant, can result in considerable acceleration of the resultant debris. This may provide some of the source of the energy required to position Jupiter and Saturn much further out in our solar system. The redistribution of charge amongst objects in the solar radial field also requires that their orbits will change. 4. Charged bodies orbiting eccentrically in a radial electric field around the Sun will dissipate energy through electromagnetic induction, heating, in such a way as to quickly spiral into a circular orbit. For any object with a high eccentricity, electrical breakdown will occur within its Langmuir sheath, and cometary discharge phenomena will be seen, regardless of its size. Venus. 5. If gravity is essentially an electrostatic phenomenon, the unusual environment of the Saturnian configuration could be expected to have caused a difference in the perceived gravity at the surface of the Earth. It is conceivable that the electric stress within the plasma sheath enclosing the SC was less than that which the Earth endures in its current solar environment. This would result in an effective lower gravity. The breakup of the SC would have caused a sudden change. An interesting sidelight to this idea is that the apparent very low density of Saturn may be due to the use of a universal gravitational constant in the determination. There may be no such thing. Measurements of G in laboratories on Earth don't seem to agree. In Saturn's electrical environment, we may have shared an apparent low gravity. 6. Various odd phenomena associated with plasma discharges would have been observed from Earth and should appear in ancient depictions of the SC. These include helical, serpentine glows surrounding a central column, or twined rope-like around each other. These would be representations of Birkeling currents flowing between planets enveloped in the same plasma sheath. The number of strands may have varied and given rise to the depictions of Venus with different numbers of radians. We should also look at the photographs from deep space of exploding stars for clues to the imagery, since they are electric discharge phenomena writ large. One, they could possibly look like rings around the column, or a series of flared skirts. Another effect is seen in discharge tubes filled with low-pressure gas, where a series of light and dark bands are formed transverse to the discharge axis. This might give rise to a kind of stairway to heaven or ziggurat appearance. Then there is the self-contained plasmoid, a corkscrew within an overall football shape, which forms the interplanetary equivalent of lightning and appears to have been depicted as Zeus' thunderbolt. Implantation event, they show all the characteristics to be expected of material that has been subjected to flash heating, acceleration, collision, and ion implantation in a spatially restricted, compressed gas stream, together with isotopic modification by enhanced radiation, followed by sudden cooling, all the symptoms of a plasma discharge. I predicted that the features of the enigmatic chondrule shells could be reproduced in the lab in a plasma oven. A planetary discharge is a very effective way for Martian meteorites to have been created. Very strong evidence for planetary electrical scarring comes from the Magellan orbiter images of Venus. Also, the Jovian moon Europa was presumably a part of the Saturnian configuration, and would also have been subject to electrical scarring. I predict that when close-ups of Europa are available in December, the so-called cracks in the ice will be found to be electric discharge channels, with the raised levees on either side of the dark light, dark cross-section caused by discharge modification of the excavated material, in the manner of the green glass beads formed from the melted soil excavated by an electric discharge along the lunar rails. The cracks on Europa show no lateral displacement where they intersect, though displacement would be expected if they were due to shifting ice. Discharge channels will throw material from the younger channel into the older where they intersect. Cracks should not show this characteristic. After that, I need a long cold Foster. Wal Thornhill. BC. Lightning Heraclitus, circa 500. It is the thunderbolt that steers the universe. Heraclitus, circa 500 BC. Lightning of the Gods, by Wal Thornhill. This begins a series of articles by Wal Thornhill on the electrical character of stars and planets. Heraclitus, 2,500 years ago, was closer to the truth than modern astronomers. In years to come, people will look back on the present era with incredulity. How could we have been so blind? Why did we regard the universe as electrically sterile, when the evidence that it was not was staring us in the face? In answering these questions, I will show how badly science suffers from paradigm paralysis. Breaking free from old paradigms allows amazing connections to be forged between disciplines presently thought to have nothing in common. Who would have thought that mythology could illuminate plasma physics and celestial dynamics, and vice versa? This must be the hallmark of correct paradigms. No data can be ignored or discredited when searching for the truth. Every piece must fit the puzzle. Some of the results are astounding on first meeting. For example, that our sun and all stars are giant balls of lightning, but so obvious and simple when the evidence is presented. That evidence comes from the totality of human experience of phenomena in the skies, spanning prehistoric cave paintings to modern space probes. This is as it must be. According to David Talbot's meticulous research spanning 25 years, the Saturnian configuration was a spectacular arrangement of looming planets in Earth's prehistoric sky, universally remembered and depicted by the ancients. The appearance of that sky beggars even the modern imagination, which has been conditioned to the weirdness of phenomena seen in deep space. Since shortly after their assumed creation 4 or 5 billion years ago, the planets are believed to have moved like clockwork along the separate orbits. Yet it is well known among astronomers that Newton's law of gravity, when applied to more than 2 orbiting bodies, leads in a relatively short time to chaotic motion. How can the solar system have remained in its apparent stable configuration for the 5 eons required by current theories of solar system evolution? And why, if the planets and moons were formed from the same primordial cloud of gas and dust, are they such a fruit salad of physical characteristics, axial tilts, rotation rates, and orbits? Why do many of the moons show sharp hemispherical differences? What really caused the strange, pristine scars seen on the inner planets and moons? How is it that many of these scars are of such colossal size? In several cases we see smaller moons, craters so large that the moons should have been pulverized by the impact. Yet, or if indeed the craters were formed by impacting bodies, the ad hoc nature of most expert answers to these questions prompts skepticism of the current paradigm. It seems much too easy to dismiss the Saturnian configuration of planets as science fiction. Astronomers may reassure themselves and us that such an arrangement of planets is impossible. But in doing so, there is no acknowledgement of the alien sky, depicted with remarkable specificity and consistency by ancient peoples around the world. Consequently, many loose ends in other disciplines are left dangling. This is characteristic of modern scientific knowledge. It has been left to a few qualified people with more imagination to show that there is a stable dynamical system of planets conforming to the Saturnian configuration. But it raises the additional question: if the solar system has been so drastically reordered since prehistoric times, how is it that it shows no sign of it now? I will show that by scaling up electrical effects seen on Earth and in the laboratory, I can provide stunning support for the ancient imagery of a different sky, and hence the likelihood that planets and moons did move in close proximity in the recent past, as proposed by David Talbot's model. An electric universe model provides a simple mechanism for reordering a chaotic planetary system in a very short time and maintaining that stability. It has other startling consequences which confirm that science fiction writers are the best predictors of the future. My approach to the problem has been like Talbot's, using pattern matching, but converging from the physical sciences rather than the humanities. It is a lesson we both learned early from Immanuel Velikovsky. It has given amazing results for the synthesis of a new cosmology and history of the human race. It provides the first glimpse of the interdisciplinary knowledge of the third millennium. So what do I mean by an electric universe? Astronomical theory presents gravity and magnetism as the only forces participating in the mechanism of the universe. This may seem a very strange attitude when it is known that magnetism requires electrical currents to flow. But I think it highlights our mistaken models of the material world and our failure to discern the interconnections of seemingly separate parts. I will show that a re-examination of basic physics points to an intimate connection between the electrical force and magnetism and gravity. The result is a more holistic, interconnected view of the universe and its interactions, from the subatomic level on up through living beings to the planets, stars, and great streaming galaxies. The following news items were submitted by Ian Tressman from the New Scientist, August 2nd, 97. Twist of Fate points to an intimate connection between the electrical force and magnetism and gravity. The result is a more holistic, interconnected view of the universe and its interactions, from the subatomic level on up through living beings to the planets, stars, and great streaming galaxies.
The modern astrophysical concept that ascribes the sun's energy to the thermonuclear reactions deep in the solar interior is contradicted by nearly every observable aspect of the sun. That was published in 1980. When I read his paper, it just seemed so obvious to me that he was correct. And that was when I began to really try and understand the sun for myself. Ralph Jurgens certainly pointed the way and did a very thorough job. So, what is a star? An undergraduate textbook on the structure and evolution of stars makes a star seem a very simple object. And I quote, "A star can be defined as a body that satisfies two conditions. A, it is bound by self-gravity, and B, it radiates energy supplied by an internal source." Behind this definition are some critical assumptions that Sir Arthur Eddington bequeathed to us long before the space age in his 1926 opus, The Internal Constitution of the Stars. But how many students now read Eddington's original work with a critical eye? Indeed, how many read him at all? Here's Sir Arthur Eddington. Eddington wrote, "The problem of the source of a star's energy will be considered. By a process of exhaustion, we are driven to conclude that the only possible source of a star's energy is subatomic," because at this stage it had been discovered, nuclear energy had been discovered. He said, "Yet it must be confessed that the hypothesis shows little disposition to accommodate itself to the detailed requirements of observation, and a critic might count up a large number of fatal objections." End of quote. A single fatal objection would suffice to falsify the hypothesis, but the apparent isolation of stars in the vacuum of space encouraged the belief that stars must consume themselves to fuel their own fires, rather like a campfire in the sky, only a modern version. The fatal objections would be sorted out later. Two such objections are behind NASA's plan to launch a mission to the Sun called Solar Probe Plus in 2018, with first close approach in December 2024. And I hope I'm about to report on that. NASA says the mission's primary scientific goal is to understand how the Sun's corona is heated and how the solar wind is accelerated. Solar Probe Plus will revolutionise our knowledge of the origin and evolution of the solar wind. That's the end of the quote. That will follow 92 years of denial that there is a serious problem with our understanding of our nearest star. Neither of these features are predicted by the standard solar model. Eddington argued the need for a central fire as follows. No source of energy is of any avail unless it liberates energy in the deep interior of the star. It is not enough to provide for the external radiation of the star. We must provide for the maintenance of the high internal temperature without which the star would collapse. This is the rationale for having a high energy, high temperature core in a star. But this assumes that a star is basically a ball of hot gas obeying gravity and the standard laboratory gas laws. Eddington's logic of exhaustion had to set aside facts that didn't fit the only possible theory. Appearances can be deceptive when viewed through the lens of a single idea. A kind of tunnel vision develops that accommodates fatal objections with the excuse that someday we will find the answers, just give me more money. To compensate for the weakness of the excuse, those who adopt the consensus view acquire a kind of evangelical zeal, which you can see anytime you see these interviews with astrophysicists. For example, the undergraduate textbook referred to in the last slide opens with, "The theory of stellar structure and evolution is elegant and impressively powerful." Yet we have recently discovered stars that shouldn't exist. In one instance, the star is too huge to be inflated by a central fire. Tunnel vision does more than magnify the elegance of the
All right, I got that, and I'm all set. Okay. The most merciful thing in the world is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. H.P. Lovecraft. In a broadly interdisciplinary inquiry such as this, communication itself can pose quite a challenge. Typically, the greatest difficulties in communication will occur when one is questioning something already known to be true on matters of underlying principle. The confidence behind established ideas can be so high that discussion itself may seem quite senseless. This difficulty is aggravated by fragmentation of the process by which information is gathered and evaluated. The specialization of intellectual inquiry carries with it certain risks when assumptions within one discipline rest upon prior assumptions in other disciplines. No one can be an expert on everything, and when considering possibilities outside one's personal expertise, it is only natural to defer to what specialists in other studies claim to know. I've always thought this. It's one thing. It needs to line up. If it doesn't, then something's wrong. That's why I wanted to bring this to you and make you aware of it. It just takes the words right out of my mind. No one can be an expert on everything. And when considering possibilities outside one's personal expertise, it is only natural to defer to what specialists in other studies claim to know. But what are the consequences of this when theoretical suppositions, though perceived as fact, cannot account for compelling new fields of data? Given the extreme fragmentation of established science today, it is difficult to imagine that the enterprise as a whole could ever correlate all its contents. Yet extraordinary strides toward that someday envisioned by Lovecraft may now be possible through a new approach, one in which electrical phenomena receive the full attention they deserve, and all appropriate fields of evidence are included. To some, the prospects may appear every bit as disturbing as Lovecraft imagined, But for those who instinctively seek out unifying principles, the new horizons will be at once breathtaking and hopeful. This introduction will present a new deep focus lens for viewing the physical universe from subatomic particles to galactic realms unknown before the Hubble telescope. The electric universe is a holistic answer to myopia. Myopia, that narrowing of vision which naturally accompanies the fragmentation of knowledge and learning. For those with the courage to see clearly, the required unlearning of fashionable ideas carries no real cost whatsoever. The terror Lovecraft envisioned is only the first rush of uncertainty, when ideas long taken for granted are thrown into question by facts and simple reasoning previously ignored. The piecing together of disassociated knowledge will only require us to confront the deep contradictions in things experts have long claimed to know. And I know that many of you have felt this like I have. I think that what he said right there is probably the reason why I do this. I do see it clearly. In every realm of science, there is some kind of a problem. I don't mean to bring my commentary with it. I'm just sharing my thoughts with you at the same time. I will try to refrain. The piecing together of disassociated knowledge will only require us to confront the deep contradictions in things experts have long claimed to know. With the courage to see clearly, the adventure itself could well be the most merciful thing in the world, adding new insights into the greatest dramas of early human history and vital perspective to humanity's situation in the cosmos. Lovecraft did not realize that the terrifying vistas are but a mirage seen through an open door. The truth is always unified, and as such, it can only be friendly to those who seek the truth first. As we pass through the door, it is not fear that goes with us, but the exhilaration of discovery. Wal Thornhill and David Talbot. Myopia is, a definition. That's good. A disinclination to knowledge, the existence of something. I've always believed that everything one reads after a word they don't understand, they do not comprehend, because of that word. That's why I try to provide definitions when I come across a word that I don't use that often. Yep, all right. Synopsis 2, the electric universe. The electric universe model is a coherent big picture of our situation in the universe, spanning many disciplines. It highlights repeated electrical patterns at all scales that enable laboratory experiments to explain the strange, energetic events seen. For example, in deep space, on the Sun, and on Jupiter's moon Io, the electric universe works backward, in time, using observations rather than forward from some idealized theoretical beginning. It provides simple answers to problems that are now clothed in fashionable metaphysics and mysticism. It is more interdisciplinary and inclusive of information than any prior cosmology. It points to practical possibilities far beyond the limits set by current science. The electric universe model grew out of a broad interdisciplinary approach to science. It is not a technique taught in universities. The electric universe is based more on observations and experiment than abstract theory. It recognizes connections between diverse disciplines. It concludes that the crucial requirement for understanding the universe is to take fully into account the basic electrical nature of atoms and their interactions. Strangely, this is not the case in conventional cosmology, where weaker magnetism and the infinitely weaker force of gravity rule the cosmos. Such a simplification may suit a theoretical physics based on electrical neutrality of matter in earthly laboratories, but it does not apply in science where plasma dominates. Plasma has been called the fourth state of matter, after solids, liquids, and gases. Most of the matter in the universe is in the form of plasma. A plasma is formed if some of the negatively charged electrons are separated from their host atoms in a gas, leaving the atoms with a positive charge. The negatively charged electrons and the positively charged atoms, known as positive ions, are then free to move separately under the influence of an applied voltage or magnetic field.
Their net movement constitutes an electrical current. So, one of the more important properties of a plasma is that it can conduct electrical current. It does so by forming current filaments that follow magnetic field lines. Filamentary patterns are ubiquitous in the cosmos. Synopsis 3, a little history. To be sure, nature distributes her gifts unevenly among her children. But there are plenty of well-endowed, thank God, and I am firmly convinced that most of them live quiet, unobtrusive lives. Albert Einstein. The pieces of the electric universe, big picture, are supplied by some remarkable individuals, most of them unknown, and who have lived or are living quiet, unobtrusive lives, away from universities. For those with a sense of history, this fact should serve to increase curiosity rather than dull it. Most revolutions in science have come from people who taught themselves outside the academic system and were not constrained by the fallacies and fashions of the day. It has been well documented that modern institutions of science operate in such a way as to enforce conformity and prevent research and publication of revolutionary ideas. J.R. Saul argues that medieval scholasticism was re-established during the 20th century, and how, if so, the new Enlightenment will have to come before from outside academia. Amen. Ra. For me, Enlightenment began with the controversial polymath and author of Worlds in Collision, Immanuel Velikovsky, in 1950. He demonstrated an interdisciplinary, comparative technique for uncovering hard evidence of planetary catastrophe from the recorded memories of the earliest civilizations. His method was forensic, in that he looked for reports of physical events of a highly unusual nature that were nonetheless corroborated globally by totally separate creatures, by totally separate creatures. Then, by applying scientific knowledge of cause and effect, it was possible to build a very detailed model of the sequence of those events. Finally, the model enabled specific predictions to be made and confirmed. A requirement of a good scientific theory. Some of the predictions he made were outrageous at the time. Venus would be near incandescently hot. Jupiter would emit radio noise. The moon rocks would be magnetized, and so on. Velikovsky was right. Astronomers of the day were wrong. However, you will not find any textbook that gives him credit because his theory was judged to be wrong. Presumably, they were all lucky guesses. Right. It became clear to Velikovsky that Newton's concept of gravity was insufficient to explain the reported behavior of the planets, and it certainly could not answer the obvious question: why do the skies look so peaceful now? This allowed a dogmatic response by academia to Velikovsky's seminal breakthrough. It was said his theory didn't obey Newton's laws. But what did Newton know of electricity? And if anyone believes that Newton's laws guarantee a stable planetary system, think again. Any gravitational system with more than two orbiting bodies is unstable. Yet, the question is hardly ever asked, let alone answered, what produces the observed stability of the solar system? Velikovsky was convinced that the clue lay in his discovery that electrical forces dominate the incredibly weak force of gravity at times of planetary close encounters, although he was unable to explain at the time how this would create the observed stability of the solar system. With his uncanny prescience, he had pointed the way to the electric universe. I think I see the same thing in everything that he says. In all of his stuff, it's exactly what he does. Since then, skeptical scholars have shown Velikovsky's historical perspective of cataclysmic events to be wrong. However, his basic premise of planetary encounters has been confirmed, and the details fleshed out to an extraordinary degree. Several pioneering researchers in this new field now agree that awe-inspiring planetary encounters did occur in prehistory. The most ancient civilizations, they were culturally defining memory. To the most ancient civilizations, they were a culturally defining memory. They were the inspiration for pyramids, megaliths, statues, totems, and sacred rock art. The survivors of global upheaval felt it imperative that the memory be preserved and passed down faithfully to future generations in the expectation that the gods would return. The memorialization took the form of architecture, ritual, and story to reenact to the apocalyptic power of the planetary gods over human destiny. Such a catastrophic beginning explains why civilization appeared like a thunderclap out of nowhere. Unfortunately, with no reference points in the present behavior of the planets, the stories lost their real meaning. This short explanation may seem contrived until the wealth of supporting evidence can be presented. However, it highlights the crucial distinction between planetary catastrophism of the electric universe and the neo-catastrophists, who attempt to explain the evidence for planetary encounters in terms of cometary phenomena. Oh man, I mean, every program I watch, whether it's by Graham Hancock or anybody else, it's always a comet impact. Modern comets simply do not fit the descriptions from the past, nor can they account for abundant evidence of fresh-looking planetary cratering and scarring. Besides, in an electric universe, comets are not the apocalyptic threat to Earth imaginatively portrayed by artists. Such pictures are entirely fanciful because a comet would be disrupted electrically by a cosmic thunderbolt before it hit the Earth. The only visible evidence remaining, an electric arc crater like Meteor Crater in Arizona. The electric universe model grew from the realization that a new plasma cosmology and an understanding of electrical phenomena in space could illuminate the new work being done in comparative mythology. In return, the images of events witnessed in prehistoric sky and their sequence could help unravel the recent history of the Earth, Mars, and Venus. By accepting data over a far wider span of knowledge in human existence than conventional cosmology allows, the electric universe model began to provide pragmatic and common sense answers to many questions that seem unrelated. It followed the entry of the Nobel Prize, winning plasma physicist and cosmologist Hans Alfvén, to work backwards in time from observations rather than forward from some idealized theoretical beginning. We have to learn again that science without contact with experiments is an enterprise which is likely to go completely astray into imaginary conjecture. Imaginary conjecture. Evolution of the Solar System, NASA, 1976, Hans Alfvén and G. Arrhenius. The result is now a big picture that emphasizes our dramatic prehistory and essential connectedness to the universe. No longer do we have to look at ourselves and the universe through the distorting sideshow mirrors of modern science. The implications of electrical activity between planets will be profoundly disturbing for those who have built their cosmology around the weak force of gravity, acting in an electrically sterile universe. This strange dogmatic oversight guarantees that nothing will remain in future of the fanciful Big Bang theory or the simplistic story of the formation of the solar system. What Big Bang? The Big Bang is already dead. The unheralded Galileo of the 20th century, Halt and Arp, has proven that the universe is not expanding. The Big Bang theory is based on a misinterpretation of redshift. The redshift of a distant galaxy is measured in the light coming from that galaxy. Lines in the spectrum of that galaxy show a shift toward the red compared with the same lines from our sun. Arp discovered that high and low redshift objects are sometimes connected by a bridge or jet of matter. So redshift cannot be a measure of distance. Most of the redshift is intrinsic to the object, but there is more. Arp found that the intrinsic redshift of a quasar or galaxy took discrete values, which decreased with distance from a central active galaxy. In Arp's new view of the cosmos, active galaxies give birth to high redshift quasars and companion galaxies. Redshift becomes a measure of the relative ages of nearby quasars and galaxies, not their distance. As a quasar or galaxy ages, the redshift decreases in discrete steps, or quanta. The huge puzzle for astrophysicists is why a galaxy should exhibit an atomic phenomena. So we turn to particle physics. This difficulty highlights the fact that quantum mechanics applied to atoms is a theory without physical reality.
The weirdness of quantum theory has been attributed to the subatomic scale to which it applies. But now that we have quantum effects in something the size of a galaxy, this convenient nonsense is exposed. If ARP is right, many experts are going to look very silly. His discovery sounded the alarm in some halls of academia, and since nobody likes a loud noise, particularly if they are asleep, the knee-jerk response was to attack the guy with his finger on the alarm button. ARP's telescope time was denied, papers rejected. He was forced to leave the U.S. to pursue his work. And it goes on. Number 5 is electric galaxies. And 5 electric galaxies. For more than 10 years, plasma physicists have had an electrical model of galaxies. It works with real-world physics. The model is able to successfully account for the observed shapes and dynamics of galaxies without recourse to invisible dark matter and central black holes. It explains simply the powerful electric jets seen issuing along, I'm not familiar with that word there, issuing along the spin axis from the cores of active galaxies. Recent results from mapping the magnetic field of a spiral galaxy confirm the electric model. On the other hand, cosmologists cannot explain why spiral shapes are so common, and they have only ad hoc explanations for galactic magnetic fields. More recently, intergalactic magnetic fields have been discovered, which is the final straw to break the camel's back. Incredible gravitational models involving invisible black holes. Incredible gravitational models involving invisible black holes have had to be invented in a desperate attempt to explain how the attractive force of gravity can result in matter being ejected in a narrow jet at relativistic speeds. Why do we accept such science fiction as fact when an electric universe predicts spiral shapes, magnetic fields, and jets? The cosmic magnetic fields simply delineate the electric currents that create, move, and light the galaxies. And the next one is number 6, electric stars. So I'll stop there and say, come on over here and check it out. I want to keep this video short and sweet and pithy. Thanks for watching. Wal Thornhill, and that can be seen right here on his page that I will provide a link to in the description on his website, hollowscience.com. Thanks for listening.
And that'll about do it, folks. Thanks.
Hi, I just wanted to let you know that I just did an interview or a show with a pleasant fellow named Dave from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, going to air tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern. And if you can get a chance to get over there, I promised him that I would be in the chat room, and I'll have to listen to myself, I guess. I was as nervous.
Good night, everyone. I'll see you next week. Look for upload premiere coming soon. And we're going to be doing another chat with Andy and Adusa. Alright, take care. I'll see you on down the road.
closing